Hey guys, welcome to the channel. As you see in the thumbnail, what if Madara's sister is in love with Tobirama? Before I start, please do support for more awesome content and subscribe my channel and like this video. And also guys, I have so many strike on this channel, so I have make another channel, you can check that out, and any second part of video will be uploaded there, so can check my new channel, so you can subscribe that channel also and see the video. The link for channel is in description. Go support and follow the BECCABUG92 for writing that awesome fanfic, and also make sure to comment on this story, link in the description. Bikini Uchiha. Affiliation. Uchiha Clan. Current ninja rank. NA. Date of birth. August 25th. Age. 21. Zodiac sign. Virgo. Height. 5'2". Weight. 130 pounds. Autumn was coming in the fire country. The once green leaves of summer had begun to change into the rich reds and golds of fall. The Uchiha compound bustled with activity. Women were knelt over the small flowing creek, dipping garments in the water and rubbing them clean. Children giggled and scurried through the adults' legs. Men, soldiers, sparred with each other on the training grounds. It was incredibly peaceful, a peace that would not last long. This era was soaked with blood, the Warring States period. Entire clans had been extinguished, as if they were aflame drenched with water. Lives were often short and brutish for weaker clans. However, the Uchiha clan was well off. They were notable and feared by many. No clan willing went up against the Uchiha, except for the Senju. The only other clan that was equal in strength to the Uchiha. Long had there been rivalry between those two clans. The Kane had been sitting on a stone bench near a pond, watching the koi come to the surface to gulp at the air, hoping for a bite of food. Her black hair cascaded down her back to her waist. The breeze lightly tossed it around. Her eyes drifted to the large wall that protected the compound. Never had she gone outside the compound's walls, but she had always dreamed of what lay beyond her home. Admiring the koi, sister. She glanced up, smiling as the man took a seat beside her. Hello Izuna. He leaned back on his hands, cracking his neck with a roll of his head. Izuna always made sure to check up on his younger sister. He did not want her to feel neglected, as Madara made her feel. It seemed to him that with this constant warring going on, Madara had simply forgotten that he even had a younger sister. "How's that garden of yours coming?" he asked, raising a hand to block the sun from his eyes. The Kane laughed softly, as if you truly care, Izuna. He raised an eyebrow, grinning stupidly at her, waiting for her to continue. She scoffed softly, "It's coming along well." "Good to hear," he said, eyes moving swiftly to the training grounds. Madara was standing before a group of men, clearly discussing battle tactics. Akane's eyes followed Izuna's, focusing on her eldest brother. She was 21 years old, Izuna was 23, and Madara was 26. Izuna felt his little sister shift, patting out the crinkles that had formed in her kimono as she stood up. "Where are you going, Akane?" he asked, standing beside her. You reminded me I need to tend to my garden." "Madara just busy, it's hard to keep a clan stable," Izuna said suddenly. "He hasn't forgotten about you, Akane." Akane simply nodded, walking down one of the paved roads towards her home. Her hands were covered in soft dirt as she patted down the earth around her plants. She heard the clatter of weapons and sat up, smacking her hands together to knock off the dirt. She hadn't realized it was so late already. Madara stomped through the kitchen, his muscles sore from training and constant battles. The house was dark, and he suddenly wondered where his little sister was. Izuna came in shortly after him, plopping his weapons next to the door. "She's probably in her garden," he said nonchalantly. Sure enough, when Madara slid open the door to their back porch, Akane was knelt in front of a patch of earth. She glanced back when she heard the door open, smiling brightly at her older brother. "Hello Mata. At dinner ready," he said before closing the door behind him. It was late, possibly midnight. Akane sat silently in her bedroom, sleep had been evading her. Her charcoal eyes gazed out of her window. The moonlight left a heavenly glow in her bedroom. She gently moved from her bed, the pads of her feet making a soft smacking sound as she walked to her window. She gazed out into the night, wondering what it would be like to leave these restricting walls. She felt trapped, like a caged bird, and she wanted to take to the skies. She had planned to venture beyond the Uchiha compound and had been planning on how she would for weeks on end. She slipped on a dark blue robe before silently opening her window. She would be back before Izuna or Madara even woke up. She stepped carefully out of her window, nearly losing her footing. But the soft thud her feet touched the ground. She glanced around nervously, suddenly unsure if she would even be able to get out. Her destination was a small hole that had been blown into one of the compound's walls. Troublesome children often used it to go out and explore. She was sure she was small enough that she would fit. And the Uchiha had not yet decided to mend it, claiming it was too small for a real enemy to get through. She walked carefully, making sure to stay out of sight of the sentries that wandered the empty streets. Suddenly, standing in front of the hole, a deep fear filled her. She didn't know what was out there. What if it was nothing like she had imagined? She shook the thought from her head, getting on her hands and knees and crawling through the small opening. Once on the other side she took off into a run. Kane walked quickly through the forest, suddenly scolding herself for her stupid idea. But then, she thought to herself, why didn't she just turn around and return to her safe and warm bed? The strange noises of the forest made her nervous as her bare feet became moist from dew that had settled on the grass. The soft rushing of water beckoned to her, and beyond the trees a small waterfall revealed itself. She stared in awe at the meadow. Small flowers had sprouted around the edges of a lake that's water was so clear she could see all the way to the bottom. She smiled as she saw a school of minnows chasing one another. All her fear of leaving the compound had left her at this point. She pulled her sleeping gown up, dipping her feet in the cool water. How I wish I could be free. Kane slipped back through the hole in the wall's compounds, hurrying back to her home. The sun was starting to rise as she arrived at her front door. She silently slipped inside, nearly tripping over herself as she saw Izuna sitting at the table. She gawked, not saying anything. He glanced up at her, have a good adventure. Izuna. He smiled at her, I won't tell Madara, but I don't suggest you going out again. It's dangerous out there. The Senju have been moving closer to our borders. And if they were the cause of something happening to you, Madara would lose it. But she wanted to go out again, to see the beautiful meadow with its calming waterfall and carefree creatures. If you wanted to go out so bad, you could have just asked me. If you want to go out again I'll escort you, he continued. Her eyes dimmed slightly. She didn't want to be watched, okay. He stood up and stretched before walking over to Kane. He wrapped a well-muscled arm around his little sister. Go clean up, he said, pointing to the wet bottom of her gown, or Madara will suspect something. She smiled faintly, running off to her room just as Madara's door opened. The eldest brother wiped the sleep from his eyes. Is Kane not awake yet? He questioned Izuna. No, she had trouble sleeping last night, Izuna said, covering for his sister. Madara's eyes narrowed slightly before he shrugged it off. It was slightly warm last night. Kane had finished her chores for the day before noon, as she often did. Since she was not married and had no children, there was not much to do. In fact, she had been feeling the pressure to get married. She was already slightly past the age most girls were taken. She caught the gaze of many, but with her brothers being the clan's leader and second in command, many men were frightened off. All but one, Hikaku. Hikaku was 4 years older than Kane. He was one of the clan's most powerful shinobi, possibly right behind Madara and Izuna in strength. He had shown an honest effort in getting to know her, and she had allowed his advances, even though she did not feel the same towards him. She figured that in the end if she had to marry, Hikaku would be a good choice. He was kind and respectful. Lady Akane, how nice to see you. Akane glanced up, smiling softly. Speak of the devil. Hikaku, how have you been? I've been better, he said lifting an arm that was bandaged tightly. Oh, she gasped, what happened? Nothing too serious. He said smiling down at her, just a small battle wound. Akane shook her head, you should be more careful, Hikaku. Hikaku placed an arm around Akane's shoulders, don't worry about me Akane, I can handle myself. Akane. Akane pulled herself away from Hikaku, her face turning bright red as she faced her eldest brother, Madara. Come with me, he said, turning his back to her and walking towards the training grounds. Hikaku shrugged apologetically at Akane as she scampered after Madara. The elder Uchiha stopped suddenly, and Akane bumped into his back. Izuna tells me that you feel neglected, he said suddenly. Oh, she murmured, no, I am alright. He looked at her, with something that resembled sadness. Madara was seen as a lot of things. Cruel, harsh, merciless, unforgiving, and heartless. But he really was none of those things. Akane had never known Madara to be those things, she had known him as her protective older brother, the one who loved her and Izuna more than anything in the world. Family meant a lot to him, ever since they had lost their parents. They were there for each other. You know I do not want to neglect you. You are busy, Madara, I understand that. You are the head of a clan. It is not an easy job. She interjected, grabbing her brother's hand comfortingly. I am going to start training you, he said suddenly. What she yelped in surprise, training me for what? To be a kunoichi. If something ever happens, and Izuna and I are not here to protect you, then I want to ensure that you can protect yourself. Madara, I'm hardly. It is not up for discussion, Akane. Most women are at least trained in Taijutsu for self-defense. I will be training you in ninjutsu as well as Taijutsu. But I don't have the chakra. You do. She stared at her brother incredulously. When we were younger, our compound was attacked, the fear you felt awakened the Sharingan. Then, when mother was killed, you gained the Manjikam Sharingan. Before father died, he sealed away the Sharingan and your chakra in order to protect you. Tomorrow we will start training. I will break the seal and begin training you in ninjutsu, as well as helping you master the Sharingan. Izuna will train you when I cannot. Okay. She said in defeat. Madara smiled softly, something that was rare to see. I think you'll make a fine Kunoichi Akane. Akane was woken up bright and early the next day by Izuna. She groaned irritably as Izuna shook her softly. Wake up Akane, Madara is already ready to take you out for training. She sat up. I don't have clothes fit for training, she grumbled, wiping the sleep from her eyes. Izuna smiled as he held up a bundle of clothes. Madara had some specially made. She sighed, of course he did. She snatched the clothes from Izuna before pushing him playfully from her room. She sets the bundle down on her bed, sorting through the different articles of clothing. She picked up a navy blue kimono top that had the Uchiha crest on the back and shrugged it on, using a matching red obi to tighten it to her body. She then slipped on navy blue slacks that hugged her legs and ended halfway down her calves. Sighing, she pulled on some sandals. She pulled her long black hair up into a high ponytail as she walked out into the main room of their home. There she is. Izuna said happily, look at you look like the fiercest Kunoichi I've ever seen. Akane simply rolled her eyes as she followed Madara out into the training grounds. It was still early, so there were not many people out. Akane silently thanked Madara for that. Now she would only embarrass herself in front of her brother, not her entire clan. When they reached the center of the training grounds, Madara turned to face her. Hit me, he said. Akane looked at her older brother like he was stupid. I'm not going to. Hit me, he ordered. She took an unsure step towards him, suddenly feeling very stupid as she balled up her hands into fists. She struck out at him, only for her hand to be caught in his. You aren't giving it 100% Akane. You have to pretend that I am your enemy and give it all you've got. But, I don't want to hurt you. At that, Madara laughed, making Akane blush furiously. No offense, dear sister, but at your level you couldn't hurt me if you tried. 6 hours later Akane was covered in sweat. Her pale face was flushed red. By now a small crowd of men had gathered around to watch, and she was certain that they were whispering and making fun of her. In actuality, they were just simply interested and were whispering about how well she was doing for a beginner. You can rest for an hour Akane, Madara spoke suddenly, eyeing the men that had gathered around. Izuna will continue your training for the rest of the day. She sighed, alright. Madara walked off, shouting orders to the men who scattered like cockroaches. Akane trudged over to a tree to rest in the shade. Her clothes were soaked with sweat, as was her hair. Her bangs clung desperately to her face. She sighed softly as a cool breeze tickled her face. She welcomed it, stretching out her already sore arms as the air cooled off her hot body. It was late at night when Akane decided to slip out yet again. Despite Izuna's previous warning, she was sure that as long as she didn't stray too far from the compound, she would be alright. She wore a similar outfit to what she wore for training early in the day, except this outfit was black as the night itself. She slipped through that same hole in the wall and took off, grinning like a mischievous child. The cool air felt refreshing against her face, and instead of being afraid of the sounds of the night she took them in stride. She smiled as she came upon that same meadow with the waterfall that she had enjoyed only a couple nights ago, but as she rounded a tree two dark shadows stopped Akane in her tracks. Her heart jumped as she slammed herself against the tree trunk, hoping the two hadn't hurt her. Tobirama glanced back at the trees. There was someone there, he could sense it. Hashirama. I know, I sensed it too, the older brother said glancing back into the trees. The chakra is minimal, a civilian perhaps. Tobirama's feline eyes narrowed, focusing in on the darkness. No civilian would sanely wander out into the forest at night. The brothers turned towards the chakra's signature, come out. Akane was holding her breath, surely they weren't speaking to her, and maybe she should just make a dash for it. Her eyes were closed tightly, wishing that she could just melt into the tree itself. When she opened her eyes she was met with a harsh crimson gaze. Screaming in surprise, Akane sidestepped the white-haired man only to crash into someone else. You scared her Tobirama. The man she bumped into laughed suddenly, finding no threat in a young woman, he held her steady by her shoulders. She's an Uchiha. Tobirama noted as he saw the Uchiha crest on the woman's yukata. His gaze hardened on the young woman. Let me take a look, the brown-haired man said, spinning Akane around in his arms. He stared at her for a moment, as if checking a mental list. You look familiar. What's your name? Please don't kill me. She whispered softly, her voice wavering with fear. She recognized these two, they were of the Senju clan. Hashirama and Tobirama. She faintly remembered Hashirama as he had once been friends with Madara in days past. It was one of the few times she had left the compound. Madara had taken her with him once, excited to show off his baby sister to his friend. She had only been 3 years old at the time. He asked you your name, Tobirama grumbled, crossing his arms over his chest. Akane. She squeaked out. Hashirama let her go and she instantly put distance between herself and the two males. Akane. Oh. Hashirama smiled, putting a finger up in realization. I knew you looked familiar. You're Madara's little sister. You've grown well into a beautiful young woman if I may say so. The cane blushed slightly as Tobirama's gaze narrowed. Why are you out here? Well. I ask you a question. Tobirama growled. The cane flinched, something that Tobirama had not expected. He had never met a soft-spoken Uchiha before. They were normally all overconfident, arrogant and spoke their minds. No need to be so mean, Tobirama, she's harmless. Hashirama said, smiling at the young Uchiha woman, though I am curious of the answer as well, Akane-chan. She glanced up at the elder Senju. Well, I don't really have a reason as to why I'm out here. There must be some reason. You wouldn't wander from the safety of the Uchiha compound if there wasn't, Tobirama said, circling around Akane like a predator. I want to be free, she said in a soft whisper. Hashirama cocked his head to the side. What do you mean? She wasn't sure that she should be talking to the enemy. Madara had told her that she should never associate with the Senju, that they were the Uchiha's rivals and enemies and would end her life as soon as look at her. But, she wondered to herself, if that were the case, why was she not dead at their feet? Well, the Uchiha women, we do not get to leave the compound unless we have an escort. I just want to be able to escape. Hashirama nodded. I understand. Her eyes widened slightly. No one had ever told her that they understood her desire to do as she pleased. Tobirama, why don't you walk Akane back to the Uchiha compound? Tobirama's eyes narrowed dangerously. That's a stupid idea, no. Hashirama put his hand up. Do not worry so much, brother, unless you're afraid she bites. Hashirama let out a booming laugh, silently letting his younger brother know that he would not take no for an answer. Tobirama grumbled, quickly turning on his heel and stomping off. Who knows, Hashirama said softly, maybe you will learn that not all Uchiha are bloodthirsty. The Uchiha and the Senju walked quietly side by side. Tobirama's arms hung at his side, only moving slightly with his stride. Akane had her hands clamped together in front of her nervously. I'm not going to kill you, so stop worrying, Tobirama said suddenly, startling the woman beside him. She paused for a moment. Can I ask you a question? Tobirama glanced at Akane. What? Do you hate the Uchiha? Her question caught him off guard. I believe the Uchiha are a cursed clan. What do you mean? Their clan, they cherish love and friendship over everything. That is your downfall. When that love is taken away, that friendship destroyed, the Uchiha's Kekkei Genkai comes to fruition. The Sharingan, yes I know that. Akane interrupted. Tobirama's eyes narrowed. Do you have it? The Sharingan? Well, yes. What about the other one, the Manjikam? He asked cautiously. Akane fidgeted. You changed the subject. You were explaining how the Uchiha are cursed. Right, he said, letting her send him off. Once that Kekkei Genkai is unleashed, that love turns to hatred, and that hatred leads to revenge. The curse of hatred is born. It is an endless cycle of hatred, which your clan continues to carry. You still didn't answer my first question. Do you hate the Uchiha? I hold no grudge or hatred towards your clan. Do you hate the Senju? He retorted. No. Tobirama paused as the walls of the Uchiha compound came into view. This is as far as I'll take you. The frown pulled at Akane's lips. Those walls represented a prison. She looked up at Tobirama, noticing that although his appearance was still fearsome, he radiated no dangerous aura like he had when he caught her behind that tree. Tobirama, his name sounded so sweet coming from her lips. He replied, glancing at the woman uninterestedly. Do you go to that meadow often? Yes. Oh, well, thank you for walking me back. Perhaps we'll see each other again. Tobirama watched with a furrowed brow as the Uchiha woman scampered off and disappeared through a hole in the compound's walls. As he turned his back and began to the trek back to the closest Senju camp, his thoughts began to run loose. She had said she had the Sharingan, and when he asked her of the Manjikam, she changed the subject quickly. He could only imagine that meant that she did indeed have the Manjikam Sharingan. But he felt no exceptional chakra from her. And he felt no aura of hatred. He knew for a fact that Akane's 3 other brothers had been killed by Senju shinobi, as well as her father. So why then, did she not have the curse of hatred he so vehemently believed in? With a backwards glance he took one last look at the Uchiha compound before disappearing into the trees. Izuna, wait. I'm tired. Akane whined as she hunched over, taking deep breaths. The enemy will not wait for you, he said, knocking her down for the 100th time. Oof. Izuna sighed. Akane. Well, you have improved greatly over the past few days, you still need a lot of work. I never asked to be trained, she grumbled under her breath. Izuna, go, I'm going to start Akane on chakra control. Madara walked to the disgruntled Akane, pulling her up softly. Izuna patted his little sister on the shoulder before walking off. Now, give me your arm, Madara said, taking a hold of the tiny wrist of his sister. He pressed 2 fingers into her wrist, his eyes closed as he mumbled words that Akane did not understand. Her eyes widened as sudden warmth flooded through her body. She gasped as her vision blotted out for a moment before returning, and she suddenly felt so aware of everyone around her. "You're sensing everyone else's chakra," he murmured, "being able to sense others' chakra is a great asset. Now, you need to focus, I want you to try to move your chakra to your hands." The Kane felt stupid, but asked nonetheless, "How do I do that?" Madara moved behind her, using his hands to guide hers. Her hands connected, leaving only her index fingers pointing up. "Just focus," he said, taking a step back. The Kane stood there, closing her eyes as she tried to focus on the energy within her. She could feel the warmth slowly moving from the core of her body up to her chest, then to her arms, and finally her hands. When she opened her eyes, Madara was smiling at her. "Good, but it will only get harder from here." The Kane's body had become slightly more muscular through the endless training. It had been nearly 2 months since she had started, and today Madara had told her that he was going to teach her her very first jutsu. The jutsu that all shinobi of the Uchiha clan had to perform before being accepted, the Great Fireball technique. And for this jutsu they had to leave the compound. Madara was in his normal war attire, his large metallic fan resting easily against his back. Akane looked a whole lot less fearsome than the elder Uchiha in her usually training garb. "Wait," Madara spoke in a hushed tone, placing an arm out to stop Akane from walking into the meadow she had become familiar with. "What's wrong, Mad Dot?" "Quiet," he pulled his metal fan from his back, moving into a fighting stance as he slowly moved towards the meadow. A dangerous glint appeared in Madara's eyes as they focused in on their victim. "Tobirama," Madara hissed venomously. It had been 2 months since Akane had last seen the Senju second in command, and she eased her way to Madara's side, glancing around him. Tobirama simply eyed the Uchihas without interest. "Madara. What are you doing so close to the Uchiha compound? Planning an attack?" Tobirama did not reply, instead, his eyes narrowed as he stared the male Uchiha down. "Your lack of an answer tells me that you are." The Kane's heart skipped as Tobirama's eyes landed on her. Within her eyes there was a silent desperate plea to Tobirama that he would pretend he didn't know her. "How foolish of you to bring a woman out of the compound. You should know something could happen to a defenseless woman out here," Tobirama said calmly. Before Akane and Madara had even entered the meadow, he had felt her chakra. And it had confused him now as he confirmed it was Akane. Her chakra had increased immensely since he had last seen her, and he wondered what had been going on behind those thick Uchiha walls. "Is that a threat, Tobirama?" Madara seethed, anger and hatred rolling off his body in waves. Madara held his family close to his heart, and having already lost his father and 3 brothers to the Senju, he held a deep-seated anger for the Forest clan. "I take my leave," Tobirama said flatly, disappearing in a puff of smoke. Silence. Only the creatures of the forest made any noise. "Come on, we have training to do," Madara said with a new determination in his voice. "Madara, I can't do it." Akane whined as she failed yet again to perform the great fireball technique the Uchiha were infamous for. Only a puff of smoke escaped her lips. Madara was sitting lazily against a nearby tree. "Keep trying, Akane." Without her knowing, he was monitoring her chakra, ensuring that she didn't push herself too far and expend too much chakra. She sighed, putting her hands in the proper position, focusing deeply on her flow of chakra. She inhaled deeply, feeling the warmth of fire heating her insides. And then she blew, her mouth in a perfect O. A small flicker of flames came from her mouth, but it quickly dissipated into a cloud of smoke. "You got fire that time, Akane." "That's good," Madara praised, glancing to the setting sun. They had been out here all day, and though it was now early spring, the weather was unusually warm and humid. Akane's clothing stuck to her sweaty body, and she pushed her wet bangs from her face. "We're done for the day. It's going to be getting dark soon," Madara said, lifting himself from the ground and tossing his fan over his shoulder. "Now Madara-sama, you shouldn't tire your poor sister out so much." An elder Uchiha woman scolded, readying Akane for a meeting with the clan. Madara just shrugged, walking off as the woman dumped bucket after bucket of hot water into a tub. "Just call me when you're done, Lady Akane, and I will assist you with your clothing." "Thank you, Chieko," Akane said, smiling warmly at the old lady. Akane waited until Chieko had closed the door completely before stripping quickly and plunging into the hot water. Heaven. That was the only thing she could describe the hot bath as. Her muscles cried in joy as the warm water soothed and relaxed her. She never wanted to leave. Akane hated meetings, nothing was ever solved at them, and there was always so much arguing. Arguing because a majority of the clan was tired of the constant warring with the Senju, and the rest felt the Senju were scum. Chieko had rushed back in, quickly pulling Akane's hair up into a regal bun. She gently dabbed lip dye to Akane's mouth, making her normally pale pink lips a deep red. Chieko offered Akane a long black kimono which the young woman slipped on, pulling the matching red obi around her waist. "Let me do that, child," Chieko said, taking the obi from Akane's hands. With a quick tug she pulled it tight, making Akane suck her stomach in. Akane gasped. Chieko simply smiled. "You look stunning, child," she cooed, clapping her hands together in approval. "I suggest to Kaku." Akane heard the voices coming from the room she stood before, suddenly wondering what this meeting was about. "I nominate myself," another voice interceded. "Absolutely not." She knew that voice, it was Izuna. "If I may," a soft womanly voice came, "Akane is getting well past the age of marriage. I know that you, as her brothers, do not want to give her away to anyone but the best, but to you too, no one will ever measure up to your standards." Is this what the meeting was about? She thought angrily to herself, it was for her to sign her life away to a man she didn't love. Her heart began to pound as she heard countless men arguing as to why they would be best suited for Akane's hand. Her lip curled up angrily, and in an instant she turned on her heel and stomped off. Her blood boiling as she made her way to the compound's front gates. The sentries voiced protest, one placing an arm in front of the enraged Uchiha in order to stop her from leaving. "Let me dot through," she snarled, her eyes flashing dangerously at the guard. The man gasped at the sight of Akane's Manjicum Sharingan. The only known users of it were Madara and Izuna. The man fell back, startled at the dangerous aura coming from the female. He had known Akane for a while, and she had always been sweet and soft-spoken. Tobirama sensed the ominous aura and turned curiously towards the trees. Expecting a dangerous enemy, he was surprised to see a furious Akane step through the line of forest. She paused when she saw him before letting out an audible sigh and turning back on her heel. He felt confused at the girl's actions. "Where are you going?" She said nothing, her back still turned to him. And then he heard it, a soft sob. Akane was crying, and suddenly, even though he had no idea what had happened, he felt pity for the woman. "I'm leaving," she murmured, her voice choked. "You just got here." She turned around angrily, tears falling from her cheeks. Tobirama paused as he saw them. Her eyes were blazing red, not a normal Sharingan, he noted. Her Manjicum was activated. "Let me see your eyes," he said, walking towards her. "Oh no. Get away from me," she shrieked as he placed his hands on either side of her head, trapping her against a tree. He stared intently at her, as if studying every line within her eyes, and her face grew hot at the close proximity. Despite his calm composure, he noted to himself how beautiful those blood-red eyes were. "What happened?" he asked, pulling away from the woman, whose face was nearly as red as a tomato. "None of your business," she retorted. Tobirama raised an eyebrow, noted. Her eyes had changed back into that wholesome charcoal, yet the anger was still deep within them. The duo was silent for a long time, only the soft rushing of water made itself known. Akane sat down on the ground, her back resting against a tree as she pressed her hands to her eyes. She knew the downfalls of the Manjicum Sharingan, and she hadn't really meant to activate them. Madara had informed her that when used too often, or for prolonged periods of time, the Manjicum deteriorated eyesight, plunging the user into utter darkness. Tobirama watched on curiously. "Hn, when will you be making your way back to the compound?" "I'm not going back. She murmured, rubbing at her eyes until her vision cleared. She glanced up at the male Senju, who looked down at her with a mild interest. But suddenly his attitude changed as his head shot to the left. He took a preparatory step. "Get away from her." Akane flew to her feet as Izuna and Madara appeared in the clearing, Sharingan activated. Tobirama took a few steps back as Izuna grabbed his sister by the arm and pulled her behind him. "Aizu, Madara, wait," she cried as Madara charged at the younger Senju. Izuna held her back, believing he had just saved his younger sister from a painful death. In one fluid movement, Tobirama's hands created multiple seals, and in a torrid rush, the calm water of the lake became rocky. A massive amount of water rose as a snarling dragon, its malicious eyes focusing on the approaching Uchiha. With a roar, the dragon attacked. Madara plunged his fan into the ground, effectively blocking the water jutsu. Akane put her hands in front of her face to block the water that splashed nearby. "Madara!" Izuna cried as suddenly numerous Senju reinforcements jumped from the trees. Madara jumped back to Izuna and his sister, eyeing the reinforcements warily. Hashirama stood at the front of the group, looking disapprovingly between Tobirama and Madara. "Madara," Hashirama said calmly, his brow furrowed. "Hashirama," hissed Madara in reply. Suddenly more Uchiha came from the trees as a tense standoff began. Izuna muttered to one of the men, who nodded and gently grabbed Akane's arm. "Lady Akane, I'll be taking you back to the compound." "Oh no." She sent a desperate look to Tobirama, who only stared at her with some unreadable emotion. Just as the shinobi pulled Akane away, a battle broke out. The clash of metal, the smack of wood and water and the burn of fire filled the air, but the sound drifted away as the man whisked Akane back to the Uchiha compound. The compound was in a frenzy, men were quickly tossing on battle gear as they made their way out to help Madara, Izuna, and the rest of their clansmen against the Senju. Women ushered children back into their homes, eyeing the distant blazes and smoke with worry. Akane's heart pounded, she never meant for this to happen, she should have known Madara and Izuna would come looking for her. She should have just left and ignored Tobirama's questions. Tobirama, she suddenly wondered if he was okay. She then scolded herself for worrying about Senju before her own brothers. The Uchiha man came shuffling into the compound with the sunrise. Looking tired and forlorn, many quickly made their way to their respective homes. Akane watched desperately, waiting for her brothers to appear, but her heart stopped when only Madara came into her sight. His eyes were filled with bitter hatred and anger. Her eyes scanned the stretchers that held casualties of the battle, men's bodies covered in white sheets. She hurried over to her eldest brother. His eyes were different, and not just the emotions that were within them. Madara. Your eyes. Suddenly she noticed the disdainful look some of the other Uchiha. Madara. Where's Izuna? Madara glanced at her, his eyes holding a new sadness. He didn't make it. What do you mean he didn't make it? She said, her heart pounding violently. He is dead. That Senju bastard killed him. But Senju? What came from Madara's mouth next was something Akane had not wanted to hear. Tobirama. After the funeral, Madara had promised Akane that he would kill Tobirama, that he would do it before her to avenge their lost brother. Akane sat alone at her garden, hands covered in dirt that had started to become mud from her tears. Her heart ached so badly she thought she herself was going to die. Hands fisted in kneaded dirt, an attempt to throw her emotions into something else. Her tears fell to the earth, quickly being absorbed by the dry dirt. It had been a week since Izuna's death, and Akane had cried every single day. Madara had all but disappeared, only showing his face to check on Akane. She had learned that Izuna had given Madara his eyes, and then continued to fight blind, until Tobirama slain him. However, most of the other Uchiha believed that Madara had stolen Izuna's eyes to save his own eyesight. Izuna. His name came out as a broken whimper. Akane pulled her knees to her chest, letting her sobs echo through the courtyard. She wiped at her leaking eyes, leaving small trails of dirt on her angelic face. Tobirama stared at his brother indignantly. You would deny that you care about that Uchiha woman? If that is so, why did you continue to go to that meadow even though I warned you against it? Hashirama was not normally so serious and stern, but because of his brother's actions, more Senju had been lost to battles. That was not even the most serious offense. Hashirama had been planning to suggest a peace treaty to the Uchiha within a week's time, but now he was certain the Uchiha would have none of it. Tobirama had killed their second in command. Do not scold me, brother, I am not child, Tobirama said lowly. You're ignoring the question. Would you deny that you care about her? Hashirama asked, squeezing the bridge of his nose. I am merely interested in her, that is all. If you say so, brother, our plans have been put on hold, but I have a feeling Akane will play a bigger part in this. Do it again, Madara said, frowning. He resumed his training of Akane and was becoming increasingly frustrated. I can't. Then you will die. Madara shouted, glaring fiercely at his younger sister. You think just because you teach me some flashy jutsu that I would survive? Izuna was trained his whole life and look what happened to him. She screamed back, tears prickling at her eyes. Madara had not been the same since Izuna's death. He had become harsher, crueler, even to his last remaining sibling. Madara said nothing, turning on his heel, he left Akane in the very same meadow where that dreaded battle had taken place. It held none of the same beauty. The once lush grass was now scorched and dead, the water had dirtied with blood, it was a dead land now. Akane felt anger boiling up in her stomach as the tears fell freely down her face. Taking a deep breath, the familiar warmth of fire filled her body, and to her surprise when she exhaled, a large flaming ball of chakra shot out, making the water sizzle before the waterfall, but the fire out. Madara-sama. We're going to find Tobirama, Madara growled, and I'm going to kill him. A trap. How was he stupid enough to fall into a trap? Sweat dripped down Tobirama's face as he grunted in pain. Two Uchiha shinobi held him by his upper arm, dragging him through the dirt. His hands were bound. He could only hope that his comrades would find him before he was killed. He looked up at his reaper without fear. Madara stood before him, looking like the harbinger of death. The black mane of hair moved gently, yet ominously in the wind, thick arms crossed over his chest. Tobirama, how kind of you to join us, Madara seethed. Tobirama did not respond, a simple glare was sent in Madara's direction. You killed my brother, threatened the life of my sister. I never threatened your sister, Tobirama growled back. Madara scoffed, why should I believe scum like you? Madara grabbed Tobirama's chin violently, nearly making the Senju wince in pain. I'm going to kill you, Senju, and deliver your body to my sister, so that she knows the man who killed her treasured sibling is dead. Tobirama closed his eyes, an image of Akane suddenly filling his mind. And suddenly his brother's words entered his head. You would deny that you care about that Uchiha woman, and in the silence of his mind he answered. I do care about her. He wouldn't admit it out loud, but he had stayed up at night thinking of Akane, of her perfect heart-shaped face, and her large welcoming charcoal eyes. The way her hair swayed when she walked and reminded him of a fine silk. Her skin that was as pale and beautiful as the moonlight itself, but what he enjoyed most about his visits with Akane in that meadow were the way she said his name. "You will look at me as I kill you." Madara shouted angrily, making Tobirama's eyes snap open. Madara had pulled out a katana. "Don't worry," he hissed venomously, "I'll make it quick." Raising the katana, Madara prepared to strike Tobirama down. With a vicious shout, Madara went to impale Tobirama with the blade, who had closed his eyes again, bracing for impact. "No." Tobirama's eyes shot open, a stunned look on his face as he saw Akane before him. The katana pierced through both of her hands, inches away from her face. Her face was wrenched up in pain as blood dripped from her palms down her arm, where it dripped off her elbows into the ground. Tobirama then noticed the kunai that had been dropped before him. Akane had tossed it down swiftly before she blocked the katana. Madara's face contorted in rage. "Get out of the way, Akane. This man killed Izuna." "I know that," she shouted back. "Then why do you defend him?" Madara's voice boomed, causing Akane to shrink back. She winced as the blade moved slightly, but remained embedded in her hands. This is where hatred has gotten us. We've lost so many, on both sides, this needs to end." "No. He will die. And if you dare to stand in the way, you will die as well." Madara pulled the blade from her hands, making her gasp in pain as he prepared to strike his own sister down. The rope finally snapped, and Tobirama grabbed Akane by the waist, jumping back just as Madara brought the katana down. Just then Hashirama jumped into the clearing with reinforcements. "Madara, that is enough," Hashirama spoke, his eyes not missing the way his younger brother held the young Uchiha woman protectively. Akane was not listening to the conversation between Hashirama and Madara. All she could focus on was the pain in her hands and the blood that covered her forearms. "Tobirama, take Akane back to our camp." Tobirama's head snapped up, looking at his brother questioningly. Hashirama's eyes told him not to question his motives before his gaze returned to Madara, who voiced his protest, attempting to get close to his sister. Tobirama scooped Akane up in his arms before darting off into the forest. Akane felt utterly uneasy as the Senju medic bandaged her hands. She hadn't missed the questioning, curious, and some malicious glances that had been sent her way as Tobirama carried her into the camp. She winced when the bandages were pulled a little too tight. Tobirama stood in the corner of the medicinal tent, his arms crossed over his chest as he watched intently. Once the medic had finished, Tobirama gently grabbed Akane by the arm, taking her from the tent and pushing her in the direction of his own tent. It was small and cramped, something Akane was not used to. "You will sleep here," Tobirama said, gesturing to the small sleeping mat on the ground. "But where will you sleep?" "I will sleep on the ground outside." "But I can't take your bed." Tobirama raised an eyebrow. "It's hardly a bed." "Mat, whatever you want to call it," Akane corrected. "This is not up for debate, you are sleeping in here," he said, moving the flap of the tent to exit. Wait. Letting the tent flap fold close, Tobirama turned to the young Uchiha woman. Her face had turned a bright shade of red. "Hana, could you stay in here?" Tobirama sighed, but sat beside Akane on the mat. He figured he owed her as much, she had saved his life. He watched curiously as Akane gently moved her fingers. And he suddenly wished he had protected her from those wounds. "Thank you," he said suddenly, not looking at the woman beside him. "You're welcome," she fidgeted nervously before leaning towards the Senju, placing a tender kiss on the corner of his mouth. An intimate move he had not expected, and his lips parted in surprise. "Oh, I'm sorry." Akane blushed, turning her face away from him. He reached out, his hand gently brushing her midnight black bangs behind her ear. She glanced curiously at him from the corner of her eye, her blush lessening to a soft pink. "Don't be sorry." His hand rested against her cheek. A slight commotion disrupted the intimate moment as Tobirama got up from his spot and poked his head out of the tent. Hashirama had returned with his squad. His eyes caught Tobirama's and he swiftly moved to his tent. "Is Akane in there?" he asked softly. Tobirama nodded, parting the flap as Hashirama ducked inside. Hashirama nodded at his youngest brother, giving him a silent cue to leave. Akane nearly protested, but decided it was best to keep her mouth shut. She was in enemy territory, and if they wanted, they could kill her as soon as look at her. "Do you mind if I sit down, Akane-chan?" Hashirama asked softly, smiling gently at the young woman. Akane patted the space beside her, the space Tobirama had just occupied. Hashirama sat down, letting out a weary sigh. "Firstly, I wanted to thank you for protecting my brother. I can never repay you for saving his life." Madara. "Well. I can't go back," she murmured. "I wouldn't let you go back even if you wanted to." "So I'm a captive then?" she teased. Hashirama chuckled softly. "I suppose if you want to put it that way." Madara is angry. He has lost his last brother and now pushed away his only sister. I assume all this rage and his lack of clear thinking is due to his grief. But I believe he will come around. I proposed a treaty of peace to found a village where we can all call home and live in harmony. Many of the other Uchiha seem accepting, so I am certain that with persuasion by the others, Madara will submit. He noticed the forlorn look in her face. Do not worry, Akane-chan, no one here will hurt you. I just want to keep you safe, for my brother's sake. To Akane's surprise, the Senju were not savages, as Madara had told her on multiple occasions. Though some had sent nasty glares at her when she first arrived, once they learned that she had risked her own life to protect their leader's brother, their feelings quickly changed. And the more time Akane spent amongst the Senju, the more she liked them. They were kind and compassionate to each other, yet fearsome warriors when it came to battle. But Akane could tell, war and death was not something they preferred, unlike the Uchiha clan who lived for battle. They wanted peace amongst shinobi, and Hashirama was determined to be the one to start this new way of life. Akane, dear. Come here for a moment. Akane glanced over at the elderly Senju woman before quickly rising to her feet and hurrying to her. Sit. What is it, Jun-sama? Akane asked softly, kneeling beside the old woman. Jun was one of the Senju who had welcomed Akane in with open arms. When she asked Hashirama why the woman was so welcoming to her, he simply shrugged. Look at this, Jun gently moved her hands away from a small tsubaki flower, isn't it beautiful? Akane smiled softly, it is very beautiful. It reminds me of you, Jun said softly, a soft beauty, yet its bright red color shows that there is strength and love within it. The soft blush adorned Akane's cheeks, thank you Jun-sama. The elderly woman gently grabbed Akane's hands, encasing them in her old wrinkled ones. I see great things from you, dear. I know you wonder why I am so welcoming toward you when you are an Uchiha and I a Senju. I do not see people for what clan they hail from, I see them for who they truly are. And you Akane are a good person, I can tell. Tobirama and Hashirama stood off towards the other side of the camp, watching Jun and Akane curiously. She fits in well here, Hashirama said softly, a twinkle of a smile appearing in his eyes. It's a shame she wasn't born a Senju. Tobirama did not reply, he simply stared forward at the two women, watching Akane's lips break into a sweet smile. She has to go back, Tobirama said, his arms crossed in front of his chest. We can't let her go back, she'll surely be shunned by her whole clan, and who knows what Madara would do to her. And if we keep her here, then the Uchiha may find that as a reason to retaliate. Tobirama retorted. He would send her to her death then. Tobirama's eyes narrowed dangerously, Madara would not kill his last living relative. How certain are you on that, Tobirama? I'd like you to think on that, brother. And with that Hashirama made his way towards the two women. Jun-sama, I am glad that you have welcomed Akane with such grace. Akane glanced up, bowing her head slightly to Hashirama. Jun let out a soft cackle, she reminds me so much of my daughter when she was that age. Hashirama chuckled, Akane will be with us for a while, so I hope you continue to be as pleasant as always. Would you mind if I stole Akane-chan for a moment? The elderly woman smiled and shooed Akane away, who stood slowly and brushed some dirt from her kimono. Senju and Uchiha walked beside one another. What did you wish to speak to me about, Hashirama-sama? Akane said, inspecting the ground closely. Madara paced angrily in front of the gathered members of his clan. A plan had devised in his mind, he would get Akane back. He had convinced himself that she was confused and did not know what she was doing. He had told the two Uchiha members that had been with him not to mention a word of what happened. And the two shinobi knew better than to disobey Madara Uchiha. The Senju have kidnapped my sister, Madara said, his voice in a low grumble. Gasps and whispers were heard amongst the other members. The Uchiha and Senju can never be one. We are oil and water. They are only good when dead. They have dared to take the lady of the clan. They are savages, and if left to their own devices will kill her. We will raise war and rescue Akane. Angered shouts echoed through the compound. Prepare yourselves. We leave at daybreak. I will go back, Akane said softly. Hashirama was sitting silently beside her, his head shaking softly. Akane-chan, I will not put your clan in danger. I will not be responsible for any deaths. If Madara kills me, so be it, but I know that he will have a deeper plan. She paused, suddenly feeling guilty for talking about her brother in a bad light. But it was the truth, he will twist the truth, that's what Madara does. At this moment he is probably rousing the other Uchiha to get them to attack. And they will. Madara has a way with words. I would not feel right sending you back there, to your doom, Hashirama said softly. You are not sending me back, I am going by my own choice. Please, do not try to convince me to stay. Akane stood slowly, her eyes gazing out across the forest. Thank you Hashirama, for your hospitality. And tell Jun, I appreciated her kindness. The cane pushed back the flap of Tobirama's tent, taken aback to find the Senju sitting inside looking through scrolls. He glanced up at her disinterestedly. Without saying a word, Akane grabbed the small pack that she had been given to hold her old clothes. She had slung it over her shoulder and begun to leave the tent when Tobirama finally decided to speak. "Where are you going?" She paused, glancing back at those crimson eyes. "I am going home." "No you're not," Tobirama said, suddenly standing up and smacking her hand away from the tent's flap. She looked at her hand, surprised. "Yes I am." Tobirama held the flaps to the tent closed. "I won't let you walk to your death, Akane." "Why would you care?" she retorted. For once in his life, Tobirama found himself at a loss for words. "I don't want your death on my hands. That's all." Akane scoffed. "Move out of the way." "Or what?" She glared at the tall man. "Just move." She tried to push him out of the way, but Tobirama held firm, barely moving an inch. "Don't you realize if I stay here my clan will come? They will kill more of your men, innocent women and children. Just let me go." Tobirama was caught off guard by her sudden outburst, his grip loosing on the tent flaps. And with the opportunity there, Akane slipped through quickly, walking swiftly away. "Akane." Tobirama's voice boomed through the camp, freezing the woman in her tracks. Her heart thudded nervously against her chest. Tobirama strode up to the Uchiha, grabbing her arm fiercely. "You are not going back to that compound." She attempted to release herself from the man's tight grip, but he had an iron hold on her. "Let me go," she hissed, trying to yank herself free. "Tobirama." He glared down at Akane, his name not sounding nearly as sweet as it had when coming from her lips before. He began pulling her back towards his tent. She shouted, digging her heels into the ground, though the effort was wasted against Tobirama's strength. She stumbled over her feet, the only thing keeping her from falling was Tobirama. Many Senju stared curiously at their second in command, pulling the Uchiha woman along, but none dared to question his motives. Tobirama pushed aside the flaps of his tent, tossing Akane onto the bed mat with a thud. "Ugh." She grunted as her bottom made impact. Her face had turned red from the struggle and her anger towards Tobirama. "What is wrong with you?" He stared emotionlessly down at Akane, arms crossed over his chest as he sat Indian style in front of the entrance to the tent. "You're not leaving." Her eyebrows furrowed as a frown grew on her face. "You can't stop me." Quirking an eyebrow he replied, "Oh. But haven't I already stopped you?" Shutting her mouth quickly she resorted to simply glaring at the Senju. He sent an amused glance her way. "Giving up so soon?" "Shut up." Akane pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around her legs and narrowing her eyes at Tobirama. "Glare all you want, I'm not moving. It's getting late, you should get some rest." Akane grumbled some insult under her breath, resulting in Tobirama tossing a blanket at her. The blanket hit her face, which she angrily balled up and threw back at him. "Akane." It was a warning, and she grumbled again before grabbing the blanket and lying down. She rolled on her side so that her back was facing Tobirama. But she was not going to let sleep take her. She simply closed her eyes, pretending to be asleep. Akane moved quietly, turning her head to gaze at her jailer. To her delight, it seemed Tobirama had drifted off. His head was propped up on his arm, eyes closed and his breathing steady. She grinned, ready to make her escape as she crawled carefully over to the Senju. She paused for a moment as Tobirama's breathing shifted and his eyebrows pulled together. And suddenly, to her dismay, his eyes opened slowly, looking softly at her. His intense gaze made her blush, and she went to pull away from the man before her. He grabbed the back of her neck, keeping her face close to his. "Trying to sneak off?" he murmured as his thumb traced her jawline gently. "Yes," she admitted, unable to pull her eyes away from his. He laughed softly, a ghost of a smile appearing on his normally grim face. "Go back to bed," he mumbled sleepily, pulling his hand away from her. "No." A sigh escaped his lips. "Akane, it's late, just go to sleep." She shook her head. "Tobirama, please. It's not up for discussion, you're not going back. So if Hashirama's plan succeeds, if the Senju and Uchiha join and create a stable village, you would still disallow me from staying with my clan. If it means you will be safe, then no, you will not return to your clan. You don't own me, Tobirama. How dare you act as if you could keep me from my clan? Why would you want to go back to them?" He snapped back. "A cursed clan, a clan that doesn't accept others' ideals. I have watched from a distance, they don't accept who you are. I've heard the murmurs. They would have you married tomorrow to a man who loves nothing about you except your beauty. You would be a simple housewife, only to be used to bear the next generation of Uchiha. Why would you want to go back to that?" Akane stared, mouth slightly agape. She swallowed quickly, choking back the tears that stung at her eyes. "Your own brother doesn't even care for you." Tobirama blinked quickly as her hand slapped him hard across the face. "That's a lie." She had hit him hard, making his head turn to the side. And he left his head turned for a moment before looking back at her dangerously. "Is it, Akane?" When you stepped in to save me, he was ready to strike you down, end your very life. Is that something a loving brother would do? Tears began to trickle down her face. Why you don't know anything about Madara. I know he is a cruel man, a merciless killer, and an unworthy brother. Shut up. She raised her hand to slap him another time, but this time, he caught her wrist midair. With his other hand he gently wiped away the tears that stained her cheeks. Don't touch me, she protested weakly. Madara wasn't always the way he is now. Tobirama's gaze softened. Speaking softly he asked, why don't you tell me about when you were younger? She sniffled, wiping away the rest of her tears as she thought of where to begin. Well, I never knew my mother, she died shortly after giving birth to me. After that my father sort of lost it for a while. He disappeared for nearly a month before returning, at least, that's what Madara told me. I don't remember my 3 other brothers either, they were killed in battle when I was young. Things calmed down a bit after that, but I guess I was a little neglected. My father was so focused on training Madara and Izuna. She paused at the mention of Izuna, suddenly her heart began to hurt. Bacane. Tobirama said suddenly, I am sorry. She glanced at him through heavy lashes, what for? For what happened with Izuna, it wasn't personal, it was battle. I understand that, I don't hold it against you. And I forgive you. Izuna I treasured him. I loved him deeply, he knew how I felt, knew when I was down, and he always made sure to pay attention to me, to let me know that I was loved. He even knew about me sneaking out of the compound, yet he didn't tell Madara. He knew I wanted to be free. Why don't you continue telling me about your childhood? Well, my father, yes, he focused solely on Madara and Izuna. But they always made time for me. Madara would play games with me in the courtyard of our compound. Izuna would chase me around. But once our father died. Madara changed. Izuna did too, but he still made time for me. Madara became more strict and serious, he didn't acknowledge me anymore. She stopped speaking momentarily, taking a deep breath. I don't feel like talking anymore. Tobirama nodded, you can share what you want with me, whenever you want. I want to go back to my clan. Please. Tobirama shook his head, I already told you this is not up for discussion. Tobirama, please. Madara only acted the way he was because he's grieving. I need to go to him. I'm begging you, if I stay here it's only a matter of time before the Uchiha come with a vengeance. The warriors of the Uchiha clan were ready for battle. Their leader, Madara Uchiha, stood before the group, his arms crossed over his chest, hair flowing gently in the wind. He was an ominous sight in his red armor and Sharingan blazing. The day is the day, we rescue the lady of the clan, my sister, Akane Uchiha. On Hagakure, the village hidden in the leaves. It was the first ninja village to be created. A collection of many powerful clans had begun to build a life within the village. The Senju, Uchiha, Aburame, Akamichi, Hikita, Inyazuka, Nara, Sarutobi, and the Yamanaka, each with their own special powers and strengths. So far, it was everything Hashirama had dreamed of. While it had been rocky at first as many of the clans of Konoha had fought and killed members of another, there was some fighting. But Hashirama had gathered together the new village's forces and explained that they were no longer enemies, but comrades that should protect the village with their lives. It all began with the reluctant agreement of Madara to join hands with Hashirama in a treaty of peace. Shouts had awoken Akane from a light sleep. She shot up from Tobirama's bed mat when she saw him standing near the flaps of the tent, holding a kunai tightly in his hand. She scrambled to her feet, desperate to look out and see what was going on, but Tobirama shot a hand out, grabbing her and pulling her against his body. The Senju male peeked out through the small crack in the fabric, his brows furrowing quickly. Stay here. But what's going on? She asked, struggling against him. Stay here, Akane, he let her go, slipping out from the tent and jumping into the fray of battle. Ignoring Tobirama's orders, Akane poked her head out of the tent, eyes widening when she saw members from her clan fighting viciously with the Senju. She heard Madara's voice shouting her name from the distance, and instantly she began searching for him in the crowd. Madara, she cried, pushing the flaps aside as she left the tent. Akane. A new voice called. She turned quickly as Hikaku ran towards her. Are you okay? He asked, grabbing her arms and pulling her to him in a protective fashion. I'm fine. Please, it's… She didn't get to finish her sentence as Hikaku pushed her behind him. A Senju warrior had approached, ready to fight the young Uchiha. She backed up fearfully, suddenly wishing she had just listened to Tobirama and stayed hidden in the tent. Tobirama had seen that Akane hadn't listened, and he suddenly became angry with her stupidity. Why could she never just do as he said? Hashirama was engaged in battle with Madara, and the tides were in Hashirama's favor. Once the Uchiha leader fell, the others would retreat. Hikaku. He heard her cry and spared a glance in her direction. Her companion had been pierced through the chest with a katana, yet despite her emotional outburst, Tobirama paid the scene no heed as he charged into battle yet again. Hikaku. Hikaku. She cried, holding the Uchiha in her lap. Blood dripped from the corner of his mouth and she desperately tried to wipe it away. He let out a groan of pain as he pressed a hand to his wound, trying to add pressure to stop the bleeding. His eyes focused on Akane's face, and her breath caught in her throat as she saw the light fading away. Her heart pounded rapidly. Akane knew death, but never before had she been in the front row, watching the life leave a person. Tears ran down her face. Bikaku. Shhhh, he whispered, his voice ghostly and foreign, don't cry, death is a path we all must take. I died defending you, I can die in peace. Bikaku. Thank you for acknowledging me, she gently grabbed the hand covering his wound and helped him try to keep pressure on it. I hope that someday you become as great as I knew you could. Her breathing became labored as Hikaku closed his eyes, hand going limp in hers. She quickly pulled her hands away, staring at the blood that now covered them and her clothing. She stood, eyes gazing out fiercely, searching for her eldest brother. She froze when she saw Hashirama standing above a wounded Madara, who lay wincing on the ground. She ran, as fast as her feet would carry her. I do not trust you, she heard Madara whisper to the eldest Senju, the only I could ever trust you is if you kill yourself. Or your little brother. Then we would be even, and I could trust the Senju. Hashirama's eyes widened as he glanced from Madara to Tobirama. Madara. Akane cried, sliding to her knees beside her eldest brother. Akane. He said softly, raising a bloody hand to her face, you're safe. You can't do this, Madara, please, just end this senseless fighting. No. I gave Hashirama his choice, and once he honors it, we can have peace. Fine, Hashirama said with conviction, grabbing a nearby kunai, I will end my life if it means peace will come. Hashi. Quiet, Tobirama. Akane's eyes widened as she realized Hashirama was about to impale himself with a kunai. Stop. Madara's voice boomed, you have some courage and determination, Hashirama, to end your own life for the sake of peace. I accept your truce. If any clan was not fully accepted in the village system, it was the Uchiha. Many of the other clans feared them and believed they wanted full control of the Konoha. Madara wanted to be the first Hokage. And Hashirama was ready to agree, but Tobirama had stepped in, stating that it should be up to the people of the village who the first Hokage should be, and much to Madara's dismay, Hashirama had been the people's choice. Anger at not being named Hokage, and fearing that the Uchiha would be oppressed, Madara left the village, leaving behind his sister. Akane had become distant since the founding of Konohagakure, though no one in her clan blamed her. Women were not meant to see the bloody deaths of war, and she had seen one of a close friend firsthand. She had trouble forgetting Hikaku's labored breathing, the way his eyes faded, and suddenly she wondered if that was how Izuna had gone. Yet she wished that she had been able to be there for her older brother, to help ease his passing. She sat alone on a wooden swing that had been tied to a tree for children to play on. Akane, dear. What are you doing out here? Akane turned her head, eyes lowering as the elderly Senju woman approached her. Just thinking. Why don't you come sit down with me, dear? June said, gesturing to a bench that was just off the main road of the village. Akane got up from the swing, following slowly after the Senju. Why don't you tell me what's troubling you? When Madara and the others attacked your camp. A friend of mine. He died in my arms. June nodded in understanding, losing a precious person is difficult, they leave a hole that seemingly can never be filled. Time will ease the pain, but you should always remember their sacrifice. The spirits of our deceased friends and families stay with us, making us stronger and watching over us as we go on with our lives. You would disappoint your friend if you just sit around and sulk. I want to become a medic, Akane said suddenly, looking June in the eye. The old woman's eyes crinkled up in a smile, is that so? I want to be able to help my loved ones, to give them a chance if they are wounded. I don't want to stand by and do nothing as my friends die. Well, June said, cracking her old wrinkled knuckles, you are in luck, my dear girl, I just so happen to be a medical ninja. June had agreed to start training Akane on medical ninjutsu, telling her that they would start in a few days. Akane had never been so excited, unlike when Madara had begun to train her. Fighting was not her strength, but she believed she could be a valuable medical ninja. Akane hurried back to the new Uchiha compound. It was a bit of a distance from the main area of Konoha, mainly, she believed, because no one trusted the Uchiha. Not that it bothered her, she knew that in time people would learn to forgive and overcome their differences and work together as true comrades. Her feet padded softly against the ground as she walked at a fast pace. The streets were mainly empty, only a few civilians wandered the streets. When she arrived back at the compound, she saw one of the elders standing in the courtyard as if she were waiting for Akane. And to Akane's surprise, the elder was, she waved Akane down, beckoning for her to come over. What is it, Lady Ko? Akane asked softly, bowing her head in respect. The council needs to speak with you. What? Why? Come. Ko ushered Akane along, gently pushing her into the room where the Uchiha council had gathered. Everyone turned to look at her, eyes bearing down on her, suffocating her. She bowed quickly. "What do I owe this summon?" Sid, the head of the council, spoke, his voice a deep, raspy rumble. The Kane hurriedly sat down, nearly tumbling over her kimono in her rush. "You are well aware that Madara has disappeared," the man, Fumio, stated. The Kane nodded her head, but a small bubble of anger had started growing in her chest. She did not appreciate how the others had shunned Madara. Her eldest brother had valid points, and he was only fearful that the Uchiha would be repressed and eliminated in due time. But the other Uchiha, everyone in the clan, they had disagreed and claimed he only wanted to stir up trouble where there was none. "Yes, but I believe he will come back, he will not abandon the clan." "Madara has lost his mind," Fumio said bluntly. "Grief from losing Izuna has driven him into madness and darkness. He wants to destroy this peace we have all longed for so long." The Kane's brow furrowed, he has not had the time to mourn. It has been nearly a year since Izuna's passing. Madara has had enough time to mourn for Izuna. All that remains in him is revenge. We feel he no longer holds the interests of the clan above his personal feelings. So, because he has abandoned the clan, he has also abandoned his position as the clan leader. "You can't do that. He'll be back," a Kane shouted. "White." Another elder yelled at the young woman, "We brought you here because you are the last one in the line of leadership." What? Madara was the head of this clan. If Izuna were still alive, the responsibility would be passed down to him, but since he is deceased, that leaves you. "But I cannot. We understand that this is a lot to take in. For now, the council will handle political matters. However, we believe that even though you are not well versed in the physicality of battle, you can be a great leader. Being the head of a clan does not necessarily require brute strength or skill. You must simply understand the politics and strategies behind it. We believe that since you were brought up with Izuna and Madara, that you would be the best choice for the next head of the clan." "I cannot accept," a Kane protested, wringing her hands nervously. "You are intimidated, but we have already planned ahead should you not want to accept. We would put another in charge of the men, of battle strategies and whatnot. You would be the face of the Uchiha. Should you accept this offer, you would not have to worry about missions or wars. Those issues will be handed off to the shinobi we choose and you approve. You have a calm personality and you are a clever girl. I was going to start training to be a medical ninja. This caught the attention of the elders, who all looked up in shock. "And with whom would you be training?" "Daijun Senju," a Kane mumbled, her response causing many of the elders to gasp. "That old Senju woman." Despite their proclamations of peace, a Kane knew that the Uchiha would never like the Senju. "You could pursue that dream," Fumio stated, "but you will be trained under an Uchiha medic." "I do not think I can accept being the head of the clan," a Kane said, shaking her head. "We will give you time to think on it. We do not want any rash decisions. As for your medical ninjutsu training, we will give orders to Satoshi to begin with you soon." Dismissed. The Kane was lying in her bed, staring blankly at the ceiling. Head of the clan. They couldn't be serious. They must be really anxious to get rid of Madara if they would replace him with the likes of me. She thought to herself. She couldn't run a clan. It was true she knew enough about politics, having been raised by Madara, but never had a woman held the title of clan leader. And she didn't want to train with Satoshi. Her nose wrinkled up even thinking about the man. Satoshi was the head medic of the Uchiha clan. He was a stoic and emotionless middle-aged man. In all honesty, he used to scare a Kane when she was younger. His eyes would seemingly stare into one's soul. Many of the elders say that he was so cold because his brother died in his arms and that he didn't want to get close enough to someone else and feel that helplessness if they were ripped away from him. The Kane suddenly found that she was no longer tired as she pulled herself up. She swung her legs over the side of her bed before standing and stretching. She was angry and hurt and needed to get her emotions out. She pulled on a black training top and matching black pants that went halfway down her calves. She tied a deep blue obi around her waist, pulling the slightly oversized top in before kicking on her sandals and leaving her home. All that was heard as she made her way to the training grounds were the crickets and owls. While the summer days were warm and humid, the nights were often cool and caressing. The training grounds were still in progress. There was a variety of logs and trees that were meant to be used for kunai or shuriken practice, but there were also some with small pads taped on them to be used for taijutsu. A Kane walked slowly up to one of the taijutsu trees, staring at the target. In a rage, she began punching the pad violently. These were no punches of technique, just utterly angry and sad hits intended to release emotional stress. Her knuckles began to throb as the skin was worn down and scratched off, and blood began to dribble down her arms and onto the ground. "Hn." She grunted as she continued to brutally hit the tree. Sweat had started to trickle down her temples and into her eyes, making them sting. The Kane. She whirled around at an inhuman speed, the tomo of her Sharingan whirling dangerously before dissipating. "Tobirama," she panted, wiping the sweat from her forehead. The Senju male was leaning against a nearby tree, arms crossed over his chest, eyeing her not with interest, but a mild anger. "Do you think it's smart to hit a tree until you bleed?" he asked, gesturing to her blood-stained hands. "Don't scold me like some child," she said bitterly. "You are acting like one," he retorted. The cane clenched her fists in irritation. She had too much on her mind, too much to worry about, too much anger in her to deal with Tobirama's admonishment. "Why can't you just leave me alone?" Tobirama stared down at her. She had stomped up to him angrily, pointing an accusing finger in his face. "Is that what you want? Why arg?" She let out a frustrated shout, punching the trunk of the tree beside Tobirama's head. He didn't so much as flinch at the woman's strike. He was too busy trying to wrap his head around this confusing Uchiha woman. Then he heard her soft sob. "I'm alone," she whispered. Tobirama raised an eyebrow, grabbing her arm and peeling it away from the tree. He held her hand up, examining it. "There's minimal damage to your hands." She yanked her hands from him angrily. "Go away. Something is troubling you. So what? Don't act like you care." "I do care." Her eyes widened slightly, believing she had heard him wrong. What? "I said, I do care. So what is troubling you?" Her mouth slung slightly open in surprise before she snapped it shut, straightening her back and attempting to put herself on the same level as Tobirama. "There is much that is troubling me." She mumbled. "So why don't you start from the beginning?" "As we all know," Fumio spoke once he knew Akane had left to go home, Akane must marry. It is unconventional for a woman her age to be living alone. Her not getting married could be overlooked while her brothers were with her, but Izuna has passed and Madara has left the village. I do not think she realizes that as the head of the clan she will have to marry. And we have made it clear to her that there is no choice, so, the question is, who do we choose to be her husband? What about Ryota? He is a fine gentleman, Sachu said. The elders glanced at one another, murmuring their approvals and disapprovals. He is far too much of a womanizer, another elder spoke up. He would not be a good image to have associated with the head of the clan. What about Takeo? He is one of our best warriors. He would be able to organize military movements and squads and take over training of the men. He is also not very aloof, which would make his courting of Akane easier. Fumio nodded. Indeed, Takeo would be an appropriate choice. He should be out training now. In fact. Lady Ko. The elderly woman poked her head into the room. Please summon Takeo. Yes, Ko said before disappearing. It's a shame, Sachu mumbled, that Hikaku was killed in battle. He was so talented and he got along well with Akane. It would have been so much easier to pair them up if he were still alive. Yes, they would have made a good couple, Fumio sighed, rubbing the stress from his forehead. You summoned me, elders? Takeo asked, bowing in respect. Yes, please hit Takeo-san. The young man sat down before the elders. He was handsome, there was no doubt. His face was masculine, with sharp defined features. His black hair was a bit shaggy, but not long enough to be unruly. His charcoal eyes were warm and welcoming, despite being a hardened warrior. How do you feel about Akane, Takeo-san? Akane, you mean Madara's little sister? Hi. Fumio said, nodding gently. I do not know her all that well. I've only spoken to her on a few occasions. She is a kind and beautiful woman. I do not understand what I was summoned for though, Takeo said, his eyes scanning the Uchiha elders. We would ask something of you, and you are welcome to deny. Akane has been chosen to be the head of the clan, but we will not approve that position for her unless she marries. You wish for me to court her, then? Takeo asked. Indeed, however, you are free to decline. Takeo thought for a moment. Even though he already knew his answer, he would be crazy to deny the opportunity to have Akane as his wife. Many men would look at her but were always too frightened of Madara to approach her. She was like a forbidden fruit. One could admire from a distance, but if they tried to take a bite they would be struck down. I accept. Tobirama was sitting on the ground, legs crossed and arms resting on his knees. Akane was kneeling a few feet in front of him, wringing her hands nervously as she spoke softly. They are going to marry me off. Her eyes were focused on the ground. Tobirama's gaze never faltered from her. They want me to the head of the clan, but they think that I do not know that in order for me to do that, I must be married. They are probably sitting in that room discussing my future right now. Tobirama couldn't help but feel some pity for the girl. He was no woman, so he couldn't fully understand her feelings, but he could imagine what it would be like to have no control over his own life. Are you going to let them control your life? He asked. Why don't you stand up for yourself? Her eyes shot up from the ground to look at him. Excuse me? He shrugged his shoulders. If you don't want to do something, then you need to stand up for yourself. If I do that I would surely be shunned from my clan, then where would I go? Akane. She looked him right in those crimson feline eyes as he bore down on her. I don't want to talk anymore. Akane rose to her feet. Good night, Tobirama. Chan, he mumbled, cracking his neck, when will I see you again? He tried to sound disinterested as he said that, but she could tell he really wanted to know. Who knows? Next time you see me I might be a married woman. Tobirama knew his older brother had been listening in, but had been grateful that Akane had remained clueless. Well, Tobirama. Hashirama laughed, moving from behind a nearby tree. Is this what you do with your time? Tobirama sighed, standing up and stretching his legs. You should be a little easier on her, brother. The Uchiha are a very different clan, they do not take well to those who do not follow their order of things. How would you feel if you were her? I would abandon my clan. You say that so simply, but it's easier to say things than to do them. Hashirama went to turn around before pausing momentarily and smiling at his younger brother. By the way, Akane-chan's birthday is in a few days, perhaps you'd like to get her a gift. How do you know that? He laughed, she told me. When she was at our camp we had quite a few chats that you didn't know about. HN. Tobirama grunted, following after his elder brother. Tobirama felt ridiculous as he walked through the few stores that had begun to flourish in the newfound village. After much pushing from Hashirama, he agreed to find Akane a present for her birthday. However, he had spent a decent amount of time looking before he realized he wasn't sure what exactly she would like. Resigning himself to look again the next day, he decided to ask the woman who Akane had spent most of her time with while at the Senju camp, June. Oh, it is dear Akane's birthday soon, isn't it? June cooed, clapping her hands together happily. Yes, June-sama, and I was wondering. He paused, suddenly feeling embarrassed. You have no idea what to get her? Oh ho. How precious blossoming love is. I must admit, Tobirama, I am so shocked that you would find a woman before Hashirama. A barely noticeable blush graced Tobirama's normally pale face. It is not love, just a simply act of appreciation. June cackled, oh you can deny it boy, but I can see the fire in your eyes. I have been around long enough to recognize that look. HN, he grunted, crossing his arms irritably over his chest. Oh now. Do not be embarrassed, she said sweetly. What to get our sweet Akane? Oh. I know just the thing. I ran into Akane about a week ago. She has shown an interest in learning medical ninjutsu. Why not get her a specialized medical kit? It would be something meaningful and useful. And you should also throw in something else, something sweet and personal. But I'll leave that up to you to decide. June laughed before hobbling off to work on her garden. Something personal? He asked himself. The village was bustling in preparation for its very first festival. Shopkeepers rushed to put up decorations, and carpenters were busy building small stalls for vendors. Akane was walking quickly down the main street of the village, making sure to stay out of everyone's way. Loud barking was the only thing she heard before she was knocked over. A rather large dog had jumped on her, putting his large paws on her chest before sloppily licking her face. Her soft features scrunched up as she attempted to push the dog off. Nobuo. Get off of her. A man shouted, running and pulling the ninkin from Akane. That's quite the friendly beast, Akane mumbled, wiping her face off on her sleeve. I'm sorry miss, he's still under training, the man mumbled, offering Akane his hand to help her up. She grabbed it and he pulled her up to her feet. She quickly brushed the dirt from her yukata before looking at the man. She first noticed the trademark red fang marks of the Inyazuka clan. You're from the Inyazuka clan then? And this is your ninkin? She smiled, petting the dog gently on the head. The man nodded, scratching the back of his head nervously. Yeah, I just got him. He doesn't listen to me very well. I'm Koji, and you are? Oh, I'm Akane Uchiha. Uchiha huh? The man asked skeptically, looking analytically at Akane. She shifted under. Yes. Do you have those eyes? The what's it called? Oh right, the Sharingan. Well yes. Can I see him? He asked, putting a hand on his hip and leaning forward to look at her eyes. Akane. The duo jumped, startled by the voice. Akane turned quickly on her heel, coming face to face with Takeo Uchiha. Is he giving you trouble? Takeo asked, glaring down at the Inyazuka. No, Akane said, frowning, we were just chatting. She was slightly confused as to why Takeo would even be approaching her. She could only assume it was because Madara was gone. Akane had always noticed the way Takeo would look at her. She would sit on the sidelines watching the men train, and though either Izuna or Madara were at her side, that wasn't enough to stop the gazes of some men. Takeo was one. He would always look at her as if she were some unattainable prize. Akane, I would like a word with you, he said, glaring at Koji. Oh, okay. I'll see you around, Koji. Sure thing Akane-san, Koji said, glaring right back at Takeo before taking off with Nobuo. Takeo offered Akane his arm, which she took simply out of habit. You shouldn't associate with him, he mumbled softly. And why not? They're not our enemies. Takeo seemed to ignore her. Anyways, I wanted to ask you something. The festival will be in a few days, I was wondering if you would care to attend with me. Oh I guess, she responded. It wasn't like she had anyone else to go with, so she saw no harm in going with Takeo. Excellent, Takeo said, flashing her a sweet smile. Tobirama sat alone at the edge of a lake. Something personal, he muttered to himself over and over, digging through his own brain for an idea. He was never one to be romantic and quite frankly found it difficult. With a pointed finger he was manipulating the water in front of him, watching it float and twist through the air magically. He let out a sigh, placing an elbow on his knee and resting his head on the palm of his hand. And then he suddenly knew what he wanted to give her. Takeo had not left Akane's side since meeting her on the main street of Konoha, and she was beginning to get a little frustrated. "Don't you have something better to do, Takeo-san?" she asked, no longer accepting his offer of his arm. No, I was given a few days off. I heard you were going to start learning medical ninjutsu from Satoshi-san," he said, changing the subject. "No." Akane said so suddenly, "I will not. I will be training with Jun of the Senju clan." Takeo blinked in disbelief. "A Senju?" He scoffed, "Satoshi is much more advanced than some stinkin' Senju." Akane shot Takeo a dangerous glare. "That is extremely rude. I no longer care for your company, please leave." Takeo, realizing he should have worded his thoughts more carefully, quickly apologized. "I am sorry, Akane-chan, that was inappropriate. Please forgive me." She sighed. "Are you going to follow me everywhere?" "I just wish for your company." "Why?" "Because my brothers are gone." "I wanna." Takeo stumbled over his words. He coughed nervously before recovering. "You are a beautiful woman, Akane, and I would just like the opportunity to get to know you better." She narrowed her eyes dangerously. "I know what this is." Takeo glanced nervously at her. "Let me guess," she said, pointing an accusing finger at Takeo. "The elders told you to court me." "No," he said so suddenly and so surely that it caught Akane off guard. Her thought stuttered in her head. They didn't. "No, Akane, I approached you on my own accord," he said. "It was only partially a lie. Had the elders not requested his courting of Akane, he may have pursued her anyways." Tobirama gazed out across the bustling village, his eyes easily finding Akane's silken black hair. But then his eyes focused on the male that was with her, and Tobirama felt a sudden surge of jealousy. Scoffing, he scolded himself. They were nothing more than friends, right? He jumped down from the rooftops, moving swiftly towards that silly beautiful woman. The male she was with turned around before she did, sending a venomous glare at Tobirama. Akane turned, smiling brightly. "Tobirama." He noted that she was strangely happy to see him, never before had she greeted him so cheerfully. He bowed his head slightly to her before returning the glare the other man cast his way. "Oh. Tobirama-kun. This is Takeo-san." Tobirama thought to himself, she'd never addressed him that way before. Takeo inwardly sighed and frowned. "Only san. Why does that Senju get kun? And I, her own clan member, get san?" Tobirama was suddenly pleased with the discouraged look Takeo had put on. He looked down smugly at the Uchiha male. "Takeo," Tobirama said emotionlessly, "I will take Akane off your hands." "Like hell. "Oh, you have something to show me," Akane said gleefully, stepping in between the males. They shot nasty glares at each other over Akane's head. Akane placed her hands gently on Tobirama's chest, pushing him away from Takeo softly. "Let's go, Tobirama." "Takeo-san, I'll see you later." "HMPH, fine, bye Akane," Takeo grumbled, stomping off. Akane waited silently like a predator stalking prey until Takeo was out of sight. She grinned up at Tobirama. "A suitor?" Tobirama asked, looking down at Akane. She sighed, the smile disappearing from her face. "Yes. Then I guess it's a good thing I intervened," he said, more so to himself, but Akane had heard him and looked up at him curiously. "What was that?" "Nothing, come here. I have something to show you." He grumbled, turning on his heel and walking off, leaving a flustered Akane scurrying after him. Akane was nearly running to keep up with Tobirama's long strides. "Hey. Slow down." She complained at the older male as her feet thudded against the ground. Tobirama simply looked back at her, amused by her flustered appearance. "We're almost there." Akane kept close to him as they trekked through the trees that were littered within Konoha's borders. He paused when they arrived at the clearing, suddenly feeling silly and nervous. Akane laughed softly, "This nearly resembles that meadow where we first met." "So it does," Tobirama grumbled, making Akane look up at him sweetly. "What are you so grumpy for?" she teased, sending a crooked smile his way. "Nothing." Despite his attempts, he was annoyed by Takeo's sudden appearance with Akane. The Uchiha looked up at him curiously. "Tobirama." Was that sweet way she spoke his name. His crimson eyes looked down into her soft charcoal ones. He sighed and shook his head. "Come here." The two sat down silently beside the lake, Akane never losing that curious gaze. "Stop looking at me like that," Tobirama mumbled, pulling a small package out that he had been hiding. What's that?" Akane said earnestly. "It's for you for your birthday. He handed the small poorly wrapped package to her, which she held gingerly. Did you wrap this yourself? Yes, he glanced away from her as she giggled softly. I didn't know you knew when my birthday was, I don't recall telling you. Doesn't matter. McCain dropped the subject, but her smile didn't dissipate as she peeled back the brown wrapping paper. Her eyes widened. A med kit. I thought it would be useful. Since you wanted to start training in medical ninjutsu. She smiled brightly. Thank you so much. She moved in to give him a hug, but right as she was about to touch him he interrupted. There's something else I wanted to give you. A soft blush had adorned his pale cheeks. Akane pulled back slightly. Tobirama coughed nervously as he pulled out his personal gift for Akane. Her face turned bright red as he handed it to her. She held it delicately, frightened that she might break it. Wow, she whispered, staring at the small object in awe. It's beautiful. Tobirama was looking away from Akane, embarrassed. That annoying blush remained. Tobirama. He slowly looked at her, admiring her. She was smiling up so beautifully at him, holding the glass-like rose in her soft feminine hands. He had constructed it using his manipulation of water, and while it was a work of art, its beauty could not measure up to Akane's in that single moment. Her full lips pulled in a perfect toothy smile, cheeks slightly flushed. He suddenly found himself lacking his normally aloof demeanor as he leaned towards her, placing his hands on either cheek and pulling her lips to his. Akane's eyes widened in surprise, while Tobirama's were shut tightly. Her face flushed even more under the heat radiating from his large hands as her eyes shut slowly. She leaned in, pressing her lips harder against his, wrapping a slender arm around his neck. They pulled away from each other, not saying a word, but simply staring wide-eyed at one another. Akane's heart was thudding so loudly she was sure Tobirama could hear it. His mouth was slightly open as embarrassment took him. I'm sorry, I should not have. Lips opened gently in surprise as she pressed her mouth back against his. Her hand rested gently on his cheek. After a moment she pulled away. Thank you, Tobirama. It's a lovely gift. Akane sighed as one of the Uchiha servants assisted her in getting into her kimono. Today was her birthday, yet Akane was not smiling, nor was she excited. She had no particular plans as normally Azuna or Madara, if he had the time, would take her out to some nearby village and treat her to a meal. But this birthday, she was alone. No Azuna. No Madara. She sighed as the quiet servant tied her obi tightly around her waist, pulling at it. Thank you, Akane mumbled as the older woman quietly excused herself. Akane suddenly wondered what Madara was doing. He had left so suddenly, without a goodbye or any indication of when he would return. She stared blankly out the window. The sun was just beginning to rise in the distance, casting a heavenly glow over the landscape. Despite the surreal view, it was bound to be deathly hot once the sun was high in the sky. The summer season in the Fire Country was brutal. It was always too hot, and depending on the day there would be humidity to accompany the heat. Sighing, she made her way to her front door, opening it before jumping in surprise. Good morning, Akane-chan, Takeo said, smiling brightly at her. She raised an eyebrow curiously. Good morning, Takeo-san. Can I help you with something? I'm here to take you out for your birthday. Akane glanced nervously to the side, trying to find any excuse to not spend the day with Takeo. Unfortunately, she found none. Don't tell me you have other plans, Takeo said, frowning softly. No, I was just going to spend the day in town. Excellent. A new tea shop just opened up. I'll take you there. He offered Akane his arm, which she took begrudgingly. The streets were just beginning to bustle as Takeo and Akane got into town. Takeo was talking to Akane, but she wasn't paying attention. She was staring at the villagers. Men were busy moving crates or building new foundations for stores, while the women looked for groceries and gossiped in circles, their children chazzing each other and giggling loudly. She unknowingly smiled at the children, which caught Takeo's attention. Do you like children? He asked her, making her tear her gaze away from the giggling kids. Yes. Do you want to have children someday? Of course, she said, shooting him a shady gaze. I'm just waiting for the right man. Takeo nodded, smiling gently at her. Her heart fluttered slightly as a blush adorned her cheeks. Anyways, where is this tea shop? She exhaled as Takeo took the bait and answered, it's right up here. He moved forward, nearly pulling Akane along before pulling back the fabric that covered the entrance to the tea shop. The two settled down at a table as an elderly woman came and asked what they would like. They ordered, and as Takeo began to speak once again, Akane's eyes drifted off, admiring the way the villagers seemed carefree. She wished she could be that carefree. Akane hadn't seen Tobirama in nearly 2 weeks. Her time was either used learning medical ninjutsu or spending time with Takeo, who had begun to grow on her. Her thoughts wandered as she stared at the injured messenger hawk beneath her. You need to focus, Akane. Medical ninjutsu requires focus and precise chakra control. If you lose yourself then the results could be terrible, June scolded, making Akane shake herself from her thoughts and return her focus to the hawk's injured wing. Her hands were glowing a soft green as her chakra flowed to the bird's appendage. She thanked Kami that her first patient was a tolerant one. There, Akane said as she finished healing the wing. Let's see if you did it right, June said smiling. Akane offered her arm to the hawk, which hopped happily onto it before Akane thrust her arm into the air, sending the noble bird flying away. Excellent. June cackled, clapping her hands together cheerfully. I think that's enough for today, dear. Akane nodded, smiling softly at her elderly mentor as she wiped the sweat from her brow. So June said, smiling mischievously at Akane, what did our dear Tobirama get you for your birthday? Akane's face turned bright red, well a med kit. Oh, I know about that, but what did he get you that was personal? I know he got you something. Akane suddenly laughed, you're such a gossip, June. The old woman laughed, you can tell me. I won't tell him. He made me a rose. Made you? Yes, I'm assuming he used some type of water manipulation. It's really quite pretty, Akane said softly, a sweet smile adorning her lips. How sweet, I knew he would come up with something wonderful. He may not seem it since he always hides behind that cold exterior, but Tobirama-sama is quite passionate and loving. Akane glanced up at June, who was smiling happily down at her. I do believe, June continued, that you can bring great things out of that boy if you stick by him. And he can bring great things out of you, dear. We cannot wait much longer, Fumio spoke solemnly, pinching the bridge of his nose in frustration. I have been making progress, Fumio-sama, Takeo mumbled, feeling scolded. It's not fast enough, Sachu hissed, glaring at the young man, we are leaderless. Madara has abandoned us. While Akane has the knowledge to run the clan, we also have an ulterior motive. We have not been blind to the amount of time she spends with those two senju. The old woman and Hashirama's younger brother. We will announce the betrothal soon, you will marry, and she will become the head of the clan. With that being said, perhaps her friendship with the people of the Vile clan, the safety of our own will be secured. Takeo said, wringing his hands nervously, I wasn't aware that she and Tobirama were close. They have spent much time together, Fumio grumbled as the elders broke out into gossip. It is in the best interest of the clan for you and Akane to marry as soon as possible. I understand, Fumio-sama. You gotta do better than that, Akane-chan. Koji yelled, throwing a punch at her. She ducked quickly, dodging the punch before rolling onto the ground to avoid Nobio's attack. The dog barked in frustration as he skidded to a halt. She glared up at the Inyazuka, her Sharingan stared at her for a moment, transfixed by the blood-red eyes. You wanted to see them, right? Akane taunted, smiling playfully, well now you can see them in action. Koji laughed before launching another attack. The two had become great friends since meeting about a month ago. They had become one another's training partners as Akane no longer had Madara and Koji just wanted someone new to train with. Despite her focus on medical ninjutsu, Akane's skill in taijutsu had increased immensely, though she was still trying with normal ninjutsu. You're not gonna hit me, Koji. I can see what you're going to do before you do it. She shouted, ducking again and hitting him hard on the chest. Koji made a quick hand seal, come on Nobio. Fang will fang. Akane stared in awe at the giant two-headed beast before making some hand signs of her own. Her two opponents approaching, spinning violently. High release. Flame bullet. A blast of fire shot from Akane's mouth, hitting the Inyazuka directly and nullifying his own jutsu. Arg. He shouted, smacking the small flame that had caught on his shirt. Akane's eyes widened, oh my gosh. I'm so sorry. She ran over to him just as he patted out the fire. Don't worry about it, Akane-chan, it's not serious. Let me see, she said, rolling up his sleeve. There was only a minor burn, could I try and heal you? Yeah sure, I'll be your guinea pig, he said, grinning brightly. She laughed, placing her hands gently over the wound and focusing her chakra. Her hands were glowing light green as the skin on Koji's arm slowly began to repair itself. Her smile grew once she had fully healed the wound, you're the first human I've healed. Koji wrapped a friendly arm around her shoulder, once you become a famous medical nin, I'll get to tell everyone that I was your very first patient. They laughed together as they moved towards their weapons and began packing them up. I'm not sure I'll ever be that well known, Koji-kun, Akane said, twirling a kunai around on her finger before placing it in her bag. Well, I believe in you, Akane-chan, Koji said, giving her a thumbs up. She shook her head, smiling brightly, thank you. Tobirama and Akane sat silently beside one another. Tobirama was leaning against a tree, eyes closed and arms crossed over his chest, while Akane was lying on her stomach reading through a book. Her head was propped up on a hand, her raven hair was tossed over her shoulder and sprawled over the bright green grass. She enjoyed moments like this. She and Tobirama often would meet up and sit in silence. Tobirama opened his eyes slowly, glancing at the woman beside him. He sighed softly before closing his eyes once again. His fingers gently played with the soft hair that rested on the ground near his thigh. Akane smiled as she felt Tobirama playing with her hair. She looked back at him, grinning deviously as he opened his eyes again and seemed to be slightly embarrassed by his actions. "I've noticed you started training with Koji and Yazuka," he murmured softly, resuming playing with her hair. She sat up suddenly, cracking her neck before looking back at Tobirama. "Yes, it helps with my restlessness. It's nice to get out and do something. I think it's a good idea for you to continue training. I want you to be able to protect yourself." She stared at him, her eyes softening. "You wanna know something?" A simple stare was his response. "Gyun-sama told me you're a big softy under that tough hide." "DSCH," he scoffed, a gentle blush crossing his face. "That's not true." "If you say so." Akane leaned forward, kissing Tobirama on the cheek quickly before jumping to her feet. "It's getting dark, I should head back to the compound." Tobirama simply nodded, waiting for Akane to be out of sight before gently touching his cheek. Madara stared down mournfully at his baby sister. The moonlight in the room kissed her face, making her look angelic and peaceful. He knew this may very well be the last time he would ever lay eyes on her, and in a flurry of emotion, his memories of he and Izuna raising her flashed in his mind. Their father and mother were never around much when they were younger. Their father mainly being sent out on missions, and their mother was always locked away in an office doing paperwork. A 5-year-old Madara sat in the front room of their small home, arms outstretched towards his 1-year-old sister. Izuna, who was 3 at the time, struggled to hold his little sister on her feet. Yet, Izuna laughed as he pulled her up higher. Madara was smiling brightly. "Come on, Akane. You can do it." He motioned for her to walk to him, and she just stared at him with those bright charcoal eyes. "Help her, Izuna." Izuna was grinning as he walking slowly, making sure Akane was moving her feet with him. However, instead of walking, her short chubby legs simply kicked and stomped at the ground, making Madara laugh brightly. "Try letting her go," Madara ordered his little brother, who carefully let Akane go. As suspected, she tumbled to the floor, but quickly recovered by sticking her butt up in the air and returning to her feet. Madara's eyes brightened. "That's it. Come on." With shaky steps, Akane slowly made her way towards Madara, tumbling into his lap. "She did it." Izuna cheered. Madara brushed Akane's bangs from her face, sitting gently on the side of the bed, being careful not to wake her. A wave of guilt surged through him as he realized that he could possibly be leaving Akane alone, forever. They had already lost everything. Their mother, father, Izuna, and their 3 other brothers. Now she may lose him as well. He sighed, putting his face in his hands and rubbing his temples. This needed to be done. He needed to ensure the protection of the Uchiha, even if they shunned him, even if it killed him. He leaned down slowly, moving her bangs away from her forehead and placing a loving kiss against her skin. He gently touched his forehead to hers. "Please forgive me." And with that he vanished from the room, a look of deep determination in his eyes. Akane was deeply troubled the next day, though she could not understand why. She walked silently beside Tobirama, her eyes staring blatantly at the ground in disinterest. Tobirama was staring at her. He knew what was going on just beyond the outskirts of the village. And he worried that if the tension that radiated in the air was what was bothering her. Hashirama had told Tobirama not to tell Akane anything about what was going on beyond Konoha's borders. "Tobirama?" Akane asked softly, her voice sounding frail and broken. His eyes narrowed, not liking her tone. It put him on edge to hear his normally strong-toned Akane speaking so gently and scared. "Yes." She stopped walking, staring up into Tobirama's crimson eyes. "Is there something going on?" He raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" I adjust her eyes straight to the ground. "I feel something foul in the air." Tobirama frowned, but only slightly. He could feel it too. Some deeply malevolent chakra was flooding into the village, putting many of the other shinobi on edge. "I'm sure it's nothing." "Do you know something?" she questioned. "No," he lied, his eyes looking over her head into the distance. A sudden deep rumble shook the earth, making Akane stumble and fall into Tobirama's arms. His arms wrapped themselves protectively around her, holding her steady as his gaze narrowed at the billowing smoke in the distance. Akane pushed herself away, staring fearfully towards the smoke tower. "What?" Tobirama placed a finger to her lips, quieting her. "Don't worry about it, I'm sure troops are being sent out to investigate." Despite his reassurance, he kept an arm protectively around her shoulders. "Madara is going to attack the village," Hashirama said softly to his little brother. Tobirama's eyes narrowed dangerously. "We should have killed him a long time ago." Hashirama shook his head. "I am meeting him in the valley just outside the village. There this will end, one way or another. Either myself or Madara will return, but not both of us." Tobirama crossed his arms, leaning against the wall. "I will come with you." "No," Hashirama said, glaring at Tobirama. "No," his voice softened. "This is something Madara and I must settle ourselves. I want no interference. Tobirama was about to protest, but the look in his brother's eyes kept him quiet. I want you to stay near Akane, do not let her know what is going on. If I return, and I hope I do, I will tell her what happened. I will be the one to break the news of Madara's death if it so happens. I understand, Tobirama said, breaking his gaze from his brother and staring out the window. I know you love her, Hashirama said suddenly, and she loves you in return. Even if neither of you has said it. It's very clear. However, I fear that this will drive a wedge between you. Don't let her go. Sweat trickled down Madara's face as he stared venomously at Hashirama. Both men were tired, beyond exhausted, and panting heavily. Madara stopped speaking suddenly, feeling the sharp pain through his abdomen. Glancing down he saw the long katana, soaked his own blood, and a sudden unwanted fear overcame him. The Hashirama that stood before him melted back into the ground. A clone, he hissed, glancing back at the real Hashirama. He coughed violently, blood spewing from his mouth as he glanced to the sky. I don't care who it is, my friend, my brother, my wife, or my child. If anyone threatens this village, I will kill them, Hashirama growled lowly. Madara scoffed, staring once again at the blade through his abdomen, which slowly began to retract, reigniting the burning pain. He gasped, falling to his knees and grasping his stomach tightly, trying to stem the blood flow. Forgive me, Madara. Hashirama spoke gently, watching his friend die before his eyes. Madara stared up at him, eyes slowly glazing over. I need a favor. Hashirama's eyes widened slightly. What is it? Watch out for Akane, he coughed, more blood staining the ground beneath him. Keep her safe, watch over her. Hashirama nodded. I will. I promise. A soft smile graced Madara's lips as he stared into the heavens. Forgive me. Akane laughed softly as she walked beside Takeo. Resting in the crook of her elbow was a small basket that held some groceries she had picked up in town. Her mood was bright, she was happier than she had been for a long time. However, that would soon come to a crashing halt. Hashirama and Tobirama made their way through the streets of Konoha. Both had solemn looks on their faces, eyebrows slightly furrowed and lips pulled in a frown, but for different reasons. Hashirama because he had lost a man he considered his best friend, Tobirama because he knew that what Hashirama was going to share with Akane would probably ruin the small intimacy that had developed between them. I wish it didn't end like this, Hashirama whispered softly to avoid any curious villagers who may be listening in. The duo was receiving enough curious stares as it was, I'm afraid of how she will react. Tobirama said nothing, eyes narrowing as he saw his Akane smiling brightly beside that Uchiha male he so despised. Hashirama sighed, striding ahead of Tobirama and making straight for Akane. She glanced up, surprised before smiling a greeting to her Hokage. But that smile faded when she realized something was wrong. Hashirama was not acting normally, even she could tell that. I must speak with you, Akane, he paused, glancing at Takeo, privately. Takeo quickly dismissed himself, disappearing into the small crowd. Hashirama's gaze returned to Akane, whose heart had begun to beat rapidly. Come with me, Hashirama said softly, leading Akane away from the bustle of the villagers. Tobirama walked silently behind them, eyes burning into the back of Akane's head. He was worried that she would not be the same after this, that she would succumb to the Uchiha's curse of hatred. That she would seek revenge and let the darkness and anger consume her heart. Hashirama sighed softly, stopping and looking the young Uchiha woman in the eye. Akane. What's going on? She asked, eyes moving back and forth between the two Senju brothers. As you know, Madara abandoned the village. He threatened our home with destruction. Hashirama began, feeling uncomfortable under the Uchiha's prying stare. He brought with him a nine-tailed demon fox. We fought. He paused, shifting his weight from one side to the other. Akane, Madara is dead. The basket Akane had been carrying crashed to the ground, its contents scattered across the earth. What she shouted, tears stinging at her eyes. Anger and despair welled in her heart. Madara would never hurt this village. Hashirama and Tobirama stood stoically before her. He told me himself he intended the destruction of this village. You make my brother out to be some sort of villain. You always have. He left because he was an outcast. No one in our clan or this village could understand him. He had always placed his clan before anything. All he wanted was to ensure the survival of the Uchiha. Akane, I am sorry, but I could not let him bring that danger to this village. Tears ran down her cheeks as her lips turned into a snarl. And you? She shouted, pointing at Tobirama. You knew what was going on, didn't you? I knew something was wrong, and you denied it. You knew where Hashirama was. What was going to happen to my brother? Akane. Tobirama stepped towards the woman, but quickly froze in place as he stared right into her blazing Manjikam Sharingan. As beautiful as they were, he could see the deadly intent within them. Akane, there is no need to become rash, Hashirama said, putting his hands up and trying to approach her. Stay away from me, she hissed, Sharingan moving between the brothers. I didn't want it to end like this, Akane. I don't care how you wanted it to end. It ended the way it did, you killed my brother." Her voice wavered slightly with her emotions as she stared between brothers. "You both killed my brothers." She turned on her heel and ran, ignoring the shouts that echoed after her. Her feet pounded against the ground, yet to her, they didn't seem to be going fast enough. Her hair whipped angrily behind her as she flew through the Uchiha compound to her home. Slamming the door shut behind her, she hurried to her room, beginning to throw things around and grab necessities. She shoved clothes and weapons into her pack and quickly changed into her shinobi attire. She tossed the pack over her shoulder and left the compound, making her way towards the gates of Konoha. Her gaze remained on the ground as she shifted through the stream of villagers, all laughing and smiling. It burned her to see them all so happy when her own heart was ripped to shreds. She paused as she reached the gates, glaring up at Tobirama. "Get out of my way," she growled, pushing her hair angrily from her face. "Where do you think you are going?" Tobirama asked, crossing his arms over his chest. "I'm leaving this stupid village," she said, taking a few arrogant steps towards the senju. "Now get out of my way." "I'm not letting you leave," he said gently. "I said get out of my way," she shouted, catching the attention of a few passerby. Her Manjikam Sharingan activating out of anger. Tobirama suddenly wondered if it was too late for her. He knew whether or not he let her leave or stay, her anger would grow. He suddenly questioned himself if it might just be better to let her leave and let her be alone. He could see the tears rolling down her cheeks, and he was overwhelmed with a guilt he never knew he could feel. His chest ached as he watched this heartbroken and angry woman before him, knowing that he had had a part in her pain and agony. She moved towards him as he stepped to the side, letting her know that he was going to let her leave the village. She looked at him, eyes still blazing. Moving an arm up, Tobirama brushed the tears from her eyes before she swatted his hand away angrily. "Don't touch me, don't ever touch me again." So there Tobirama stood, at the looming gates of Konohagakure, watching the only woman he had ever loved leave him behind. "Just come back to me, Akane," he whispered, but he knew that Akane heard him. As soon as the words escaped from his mouth, she had paused momentarily before continuing her trip from the village. The young Uchiha sat solemnly on a boulder, eyes gazing out over the surrounding landscape. Darkness had settled over the land, as well as her heart. She felt anger, loneliness, desperation, and most of all, a need for revenge. She vaguely remembered what Tobirama had called it, the curse of hatred. Was this what was happening to her? Had the apparent curse of the Uchiha finally befallen her? The sudden mention of Tobirama in her mind had spurred another shout of anger. She had trusted him, trusted a senju. She suddenly wondered if her brothers, if her entire family had been right. The senjus were savages and were never to be trusted. The senju had been the cause of death for all her family members and countless members of her clan. It had been nearly 2 weeks since she had left Konohagakure, and yet she still had not an idea of what she was doing. She knew that she would stand no chance in combat against either senju sibling, so really what sort of revenge could there be? She would be charging to her death despite a rigorous training schedule she had created while on the road. Even with her increase of skill, she was no match for the senju siblings. The air was humid, and a deep-setting fog had encompassed the land. She could only assume she was somewhere near the land of water. The moisture in the air had dampened her hair, making it stick to her forehead and cheeks. Her clothes were muggy and heavy with water. She suddenly felt stupid, like a silly child as she stared at the ominous landscape. She was in enemy territory. She had not even thought about the dangers of leaving the safe walls of Konoha in her fit of rage. And now she wasn't sure she could even find her way back. The land seemed warped and new to her, and nothing held the familiarity of home. Her heartbeat quickened as she glanced around nervously, sensing a movement within the environment. "Well now," a deep voice echoed through the fog, "what have we here?" Tobirama stood alone in a clearing, staring deeply into the water. He was on edge and hadn't spoken to anyone save for Hashirama in nearly 2 weeks. Every step he took he would be bombarded with some memory of Akane. He scolded himself for letting her leave. She had no experience surviving in the wild, in fact she was probably ... He couldn't even speak what he was thinking, that the silly little Uchiha woman who had warmed his icy heart was probably lying dead and cold in a ditch somewhere. He shook his head, he wouldn't believe that. Akane was smart enough to survive on her own, it was fact that she would most likely run into enemy ninja that set him on edge. She was an Uchiha and easily recognizable by others who had many run-ins with the Uchiha clan during war. The eyes, the Sharingan, were valuable, and any other village would do anything to be able to unlock the secrets of the Sharingan. And it was now known that the Uchiha were affiliated with Konohagakure, meaning certain torture for Akane, even if she was simply a civilian. Tobirama turned on his heel and hurried to find his brother. Something was wrong. He could sense it. Akane's breathing was labored and panicked. A cloth bag covered her head, effectively blinding her, and her wrists and legs were bound so tightly she could feel the rope tearing her soft flesh. She was being carried, that much she knew. "How lucky are we to have found a rogue Uchiha," one of her captors said. The man carrying a cane laughed, the boss'll be pleased. We'll get all of Konoha's secrets and the Sharingan. What if she doesn't talk? A new voice asked. I'm not worried, Akuma can make anyone talk. The cane shivered, the air suddenly feels so much colder, yet she did nothing, she couldn't scream, couldn't move. She was helpless and afraid, and certain that this would be the death of her. The men tossed a cane carelessly to the floor, eliciting a gasp of pain. Tearing the bag from her head, she stared fearfully up at three men, all equally as menacing. One smiled insidiously as he grasped her face roughly, making pinpricks of tears well up in her eyes. Shame we're gonna take these eyes, such a pretty thing you are. Maybe Akuma will let us have a little fun with you before he makes you lose your mind. The two men behind him chuckled at the idea, a sudden filthy lust filling their eyes. The man removed his hand from her face, leaving small blotches from the bruising grip he had used to hold her in place. Then without another word, the three left, closing and locking the door behind them. We'll have to be careful with her, Akuma said, taking a sip of sake from his cup. While the normal Sharingan alone is dangerous, she may have that advanced Sharingan. What was it called? The Manjikam Sharingan, one of the smaller men spoke up, he was obviously the brains of this group. He pushed his glasses up nervously. What exactly is the difference? Akuma asked nonchalantly. I'm not sure exactly, but it would be best to weaken her in both mind and body. That would mean she wouldn't be strong enough to even activate the Manjikam. Right, Akuma said, as for the Sharingan, just don't look her in the eyes, and then she can't put you into a Jinjutsu. Tears streamed down Akane's bruised cheeks. I'm going to die here, this is it. She pulled at the bindings on her wrists, attempting the wriggle free. She winced as the coarse rope cut deeper into her skin, letting some trickles of blood drip down her hands. She let out a desperate cry. No one would be coming to save her. Her brothers, her protectors, were dead. Her Senju friends would have no idea where she would possibly be. She would die here. Alone and afraid, and she would never get to tell Tobirama her true feelings. Blood trickled down Akane's forehead. Her head throbbed with a dull pain as Akuma released his tight grip on her raven hair. He had repeatedly smacked her head into the cement wall, hoping the pain would loosen her lips. Just tell us what you know about Konoha, and we'll let you go, he hissed, snatching her bound wrists that were caked in dried blood. He lifted her pliant frame from the ground, staring insidiously into her eyes. Akane's head was hung in defeat. It had been weeks since she had been brought to this place, and any hope of being saved was gone. No one is coming for you, girl, tell us what you know and we'll release you. He tossed her into a nearby chair, binding her arms and legs. I am not stupid, you will never let me go. She growled, glaring up at her captor. Akuma snarled, smacking her across the face. Akane's brows furrowed together in pain as blood dripped from her lip. Looking up at him in defiance, she spit her blood at him, receiving another slap that resounded through the empty room. Matted hair hung over her face, blinding her to what was coming. A sharp pain shot through her hand, and she let out a small screech of pain as she glanced at the kunai embedded through her palm. Then maybe we'll just rip those pretty little eyes out and leave you to die here. That's your plan anyways, is it not? There was no smack this time, only the thud of a fist crashing into a skull. Akane's eyesight blurred temporarily as her head began to spin violently, her lips split, pouring blood. Tears began to slip once again from her eyes. Akuma scoffed as her tears dripped to the floor. Vernichiha, you're quite pathetic, Akuma hissed, pressing the edge of a kunai along Akane's collarbone, leaving a trail of blood as the blade split her skin. A small gasp escaped her lips as blood soaked into her tattered clothing. Then she felt it. A shiver of rage swimming through her veins, fueling an anger that was already deep-seated inside of her. Pathetic. She whispered, more so to herself than her captor. Akuma laughed, I'll be back later, hopefully you'll be more willing to talk, he said, throwing her once again to the cement floor. Akane grunted at the impact, but made no other noise, as the vile man closed the thick door behind him. Her breathing was ragged as she stared at the door, the only lure of freedom was a thin strip of light that squeezed its way under that heavy blockade. She would have to fight back if she wanted to escape. That was her only hope, yet she had so little strength left. But what little she did have, she had been storing in her left eye over her time captive. She would release a hell that these men knew nothing of. If no one would be coming to save her, she would save herself. Tobirama gazed at the team before him, men resting around the fire. Hashirama had sent them out on a mission near the Land of Water a week ago, hoping to get some surveillance on the new village's growth. But not once was Tobirama's mind on the mission at hand, even now that they were headed back to Konoha. The vision of Akane plagued his mind. He knew deep in his heart she was probably dead by now, but he refused to accept that. She had some hidden strength. Something that she would never show anyone, he knew it. If she were in trouble, she would find a way out. What she lacked for in strength, she made up for in cunning. She would make it, he told himself, and find her way back to him. And with that he shut his eyes, lulling into a soft sleep. "Please stop," Akane cried as Akuma ripped the remaining bit of the straps of her shirt. "Shut up," he growled, slamming her face first against the wooden table. "If you won't talk, I'm just going to have my fun with you, steal those eyes and leave you for dead." Akane's tears soaked into the old wood as it creaked under her weight. Akuma grabbed the hem of her pants, ripping them down to the ground as he began to fiddle with his own. "No. Please," she cried, trying to squirm away. Grabbing the back of her neck, Akuma slammed her back down, holding her tightly to that rotting wood. Pressing his hot skin to her body, he leaned down and whispered in her ear, "Ready?" "No," she shouted, turning her head. Manjukam Sharingan activated, Amaterasu. She didn't miss the look of fear in Akuma's eyes before the black flames engulfed his screeching form. She winced in pain as blood oozed from her left eye. She was panting with fear as she rolled off the table and moved to Akuma's scorched bones. Finding the remains of a kunai, she carefully cut the bindings on her wrists and ankles. She ignored the pain of peeling away the rope that had burned its way into her flesh and moved quickly to the door. Hands shaking as they held the handle, she took a deep breath. "One more time, I need to use Amaterasu one more time." With all her strength she pulled the heavy door open, nearly collapsing back. "Have your fun then, Aku. What the hell?" The three men jumped up, eyeing Akane wearily. "What did you do to Akuma?" Her blazing red eyes stared up at the men before her. "Amaterasu," she whispered, the black flames lunging forward once again and engulfing the men that had been her torturers for the past 3 weeks. Her hand flew up to her bleeding eye, the pain so intense she nearly fainted. With heavy footsteps she made her way around the small building, trying to find her escape. Her fingers gently pushed against a small wooden frame, the door creaking open loudly as she stepped barefoot onto the dewy grass. The sun was just rising along the horizon as she moved as quickly as she could into the shelter of the forest. The only sound she could hear was the crunch of her feet against the ground. She was moving slowly, the exhaustion from her ordeal beginning to circulate through her veins as the adrenaline dissipated. A shaky breath escaped her lips as her head shot up. The sound was soft, but it wasn't her, and that put her on edge. She stopped, her body shuddering with fatigue. The man appeared from behind one of the trees. A look of recognition crossed his face, though that Akane missed, as he shouted for help. Taking a step towards her, Akane let out a terrified scream. Thanks for watching this video. If you really enjoy this video, like, subscribe, and comment down below, and turn on that bell notification. Don't forget to support and follow BECCABUG92 for writing that awesome fanfic, and also make sure to comment on this story link in the description. And my second channel link is in description. PLS follow that, also regular video will be uploaded there. See you in the next video. Goodbye.